the Cardcaptor Wizard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351, Cunning Fairy. The basilisk was killed by a sword piercing its brain. Harry used the basilisk's teeth to deal with the diary. Fawkes used his tears to cure the basilisk's poison. The petrified people and cats were also cured by a potion made from mature mandrake at the end of the semester. No one died in the whole process. Even Professor Lockhart was sent to St. Mungo's because of his amnesia. Harry and Ron, who had violated many school rules along the way, won the House Cup for Gryffindor because they saved Hogwarts. Everything was happy, but Harry looked very solemn when he left the theater. When Ron asked him what happened, Harry replied, "I think the next movie may answer many of my questions." However, what disappointed and puzzled Harry was that after waiting for 2 weeks, the third movie turned back to the first one, not much different from reality. It seems that Adam didn't really participate in Sirius's affairs that year, except that he kidnapped Sirius and Professor Lupin to see Professor Dumbledore. Ron's face was a little pale. This movie helped him relive the happy past with Scabbers, so much so that he felt a little nauseous. "You're right, Harry," nodded. Adam's movie was not made up out of thin air, otherwise he wouldn't have thought of looking for these special things about himself from it, and what a past that the elders didn't want to tell him was about. Let's wait for the fourth part. 2 weeks later, Harry stepped into the dream cinema again. Cedric and his wife, who are currently working in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and Cedric's father Amos Diggory entered the theater at the same time as him. Since the division of the 9 square grid camps has not been completed, the work of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures is quite heavy on weekdays. Therefore, although the Diggory family had some interest in this series of movies before, they did not choose to rush for the premiere tickets with everyone else, but this time it was different. According to the calculation of 1 year for each movie, this year happened to be the year of the Triwizard Tournament. Mr. Amos Diggory forced Cedric to watch the premiere. Although Cedric did not win the final championship in the last round, Cedric's score before that completely crushed others. When checking the tickets to enter, Cedric was in a very complicated mood. He had watched the previous movies, and Adam was not in any of them. The influence caused by Adam seemed to be erased, so he was a little worried that he might not be able to keep his father's pride in this movie. After all, he was able to perform so well at that time because Adam helped him all the way. Turning his sight to the screening room, Adam looked at today's Daily Prophet and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Strange, how long has it been? Why haven't we heard any news about the goblins? Even if Yug is very powerful, he can't hold all the goblins by himself, right? You know, it's the entire goblin race that is preparing to start a war. According to Adam's original idea, the war should have started now, and then the Ministry of Magic would coordinate the overall situation to stabilize the situation, and Yug would be the high-end combat force to wipe out the goblin strongholds one by one. But now, the entire wizarding world is so quiet that it is even a little abnormal, and even the dark wizards who occasionally appear in the newspapers have disappeared. Dark wizards are easy to say. They may have surrendered to the goblins and then been ordered by the goblins to stay put. There was a precedent for this 100 years ago. Now that they are being swept and encircled by the Ministry of Magic, it is even more normal for them to choose to work for the goblins. Adam touched his chin and wondered, but there is no reason for the goblins to have not taken any action for so long. Could it be that some goblins recognize Yug, so they chose to shrink their forces and use the power of the entire tribe to deal with Yug first? Adam was shocked by this idea. Although he was lazy and handed this matter to Yug, he didn't think of killing him. But if it wasn't like this, what would happen? It's impossible for so many goblins to disappear from the world. No, let's ask where Yug is first, and then go over and take a look. Adam looked at the Diggory family, who had already taken their seats with popcorn and coke with some regret, but still firmly retracted his gaze. Although he might miss a good show, Yug's life safety is more important, and compared to the good show later, it can only be said that the water temperature has just begun to heat up. Thinking of this, Adam no longer hesitated, took out the parchment to contact Yug, the world's #1 magician. "Where are you now?" After about half an hour, there was a reply from the other side. "Sweeping the goblins and being yourself again. Sorry I didn't see it just now. These goblins are too cunning." Cunning? Could Yug have been ambushed by the goblins? Adam's heart tightened. and he couldn't help but condemn himself in his heart. Although Yug did thwart the goblin's conspiracy, he was just a kid who had just graduated from Hogwarts after all. How could he forget this and let him deal with the entire goblin race so confidently? Thinking of this, Adam was heartbroken. After seeing the location shared by Yug, he summoned the dark staff and teleported there. Where is the goblin? As soon as he appeared, Adam waved the dark staff and looked around with murderous intent, but found that there were no enemies around, let alone goblins. Oh, Yug should have replied to himself after he got out of trouble. Adam looked at Yug on the side, grabbed his hand and said apologetically, "Yug, I took it for granted before and made you suffer. It's okay, it's not hard at all, and it's even memorable." Yug waved his hand. "It's just that the goblins are getting more and more cunning now." Looking at Yug, who was sacrificing his life for justice, Adam felt a faint phantom pain in his conscience, and waved his hand and said, "It's okay, leave it to me next." However, Yug was a little anxious when he heard it. "That won't do. How can I leave it to you when I'm almost done?" Adam blinked, looked at Yug's expression and the emotions he showed in the spiritual dimension, and found that things seemed to be a little different from what he thought, so he hesitated and said, "Almost done means, I'm almost done. I've cleaned up the entire Scottish Highlands several times. There shouldn't be many goblins left. The remaining ones are either hiding too deep or I suspect they've hidden somewhere else." Yug said as a matter of course, "Didn't I tell you before that I'm doing well here?" Adam was silent for a moment, then asked, "Then you said before that goblins are getting more and more cunning." Yug sighed with some regret. "That's right. I haven't found a goblin in more than a week. Fortunately, I encountered a few dark wizards, so it's not a complete loss. Alice, since I cleaned up the Scottish Highlands that year, I haven't killed, it's been a long time since I killed so much fun." Adam, ? Chapter 352. They always have another choice. These goblins are really hiding deeper and deeper now. One or two are nesting in holes like mice. It's hard to catch a nest, but they can't even find out the whereabouts of other goblins even after their souls leave their bodies. As Yug spoke, his face was still filled with unfinished thoughts. "It's not you, even." In Adam's mind, the CPU was a little hot at this time, and it was difficult to process the information in Yug's words. Good guy, no wonder there is no news about goblins, and even dark wizards are rare. It turns out that this is the case. Fortunately, he was still worried about Yogurt's safety before. Now it seems that the goblins are the one who needs to worry more. And according to Yogurt, he had already been through this once 100 years ago. How long has it been since? The goblins in Britain are probably almost being killed to extinction. Oh no, according to the goblin plan obtained by reading the memory before, the goblin plans to gather troops to take down Britain first, so maybe the entire goblin race is about to be exterminated. Adam looked at Yug without saying a word. "What's wrong?" Seeing Yug's natural and somewhat puzzled expression, Adam didn't know whether to say the word stuck in his throat or not. Thinking about it carefully, "I don't seem to have any position to talk about Yug. After all, what he originally wanted to do is not much different from what Yug has done now, but what Yug shows now is not what he imagined Yug to be. There are some discrepancies. Thinking back carefully, it seems that the Yug in his imagination was never the real Yug, but just something he made up based on the experiences Yug told him every time. It was really a dereliction of duty on his part as a professor to not know enough about his future subordinates. Adam examined himself, reached out and patted Yug on the shoulder. "It's nothing, you did very well, beyond my expectations. Of course, I'm a professional." Yug nodded and put his hands on his hips, looking as if he was worthy of me. "But let's leave the next matter to the Ministry of Magic," Adam continued before Yug could retort. "The remaining goblins want to hide, so even you will have a hard time finding them out, right? And it would be a waste of time for you to continue searching aimlessly for the remaining goblins, not to mention that there may be people abroad. It is difficult to truly exterminate the goblins." Yug blinked and said clearly, "So you want to say, well, the next goblins will be dealt with by the Ministry of Magic. After all, wizards are not devils." Adam smiled slightly. "As long as you stay calm and don't have thoughts that you shouldn't have, then any magical animal in the world can have a place as a subject." The current 9-square grid division of camps is doing something similar. Redefining the classification of magical animals is one of the purposes, but another purpose is to show that all magical animals with certain intelligence need to abide by the rules set by humans. Human beings do not naturally belong to a certain camp due to the influence of their bloodline nature. At the same time, Because humans are the makers of this rule, humans are not included in the 9 palaces grid in the past. Centaurs and horses could choose to be classified as beasts according to their own preferences, but now it is different. Although centaurs and horses have no objection to being classified as absolutely neutral, even if they have objections, they will still be absolutely neutral. What? If there were magical creatures that were dissatisfied with the classification of their species? At the meeting before the division of the Jirgunj camp, the director of the Department for the Management and Control of Magical Creatures asked Minister Eugene this. Eugene recalled what Adam said to him and smiled. They always have another option, to die. There is no dissatisfaction with dead creatures. An extinct species will certainly not be assigned to any 9 square grid camp. Adam's ideas, Eugene's words, or the attitude of the Ministry of Magic did not stir up much waves, because this was the way it was in the minds of wizards. The previous Ministry of Magic was not tough enough because it might not be able to defeat most of them. Just a union of magical beasts, but the current Ministry of Magic does not need to take this matter into consideration, especially after Eugene received the news about Adam. We just sent out a wizard. The goblins that were clamoring to make the British Ministry of Magic pay the price are almost extinct. Does anyone else want to give it a try? Just as the Ministry of Magic was holding an urgent meeting to discuss the next action, and the British wizarding world and even the mysterious side of the world were about to make waves, Adam had already finished chatting with Yug and returned to the fantasy cinema. There was no way. Yug said that he happened to find a gathering place for dark wizards, similar to Nocturne Alley before. Based on the principle of finding everything, he decided to go there. I didn't expect to have the best of both worlds. Adam unexpectedly discovered that the movie had not finished yet, and it happened to be the final level of the Triwizard Tournament. Although several warriors had entered the maze, Harry and Cedric had not yet won the final trophy. Although I missed the previous Rhea, this section is indeed the most exciting part. Adam looked at Cedric eagerly at this moment. Cedric was not aware of what would happen next, and was watching the movie seriously. Although he didn't have Adam's help in the movie, he still performed well. Especially the previous dance process reminded him and Zhang Chu of their love time at Hogwarts, and the atmosphere between their family was quite warm at this time. Cedric, Voldemort is now dead, so have you forgotten my warning to you? Adam smiled slightly, looking forward to Cedric's performance next in the movie. Krum attacked Harry. The original movie seemed to process Krum's eye color to show that Krum was under control, but Adam cancelled this setting because the Imperious Curse does not actually change the eye color of the controlled person. If it was such an obvious control, the Imperious Curse would not be so notorious. Although Cedric felt a little strange that Krum in the movie was different from what he knew in the past short time together, it was now the last level, and it seemed understandable that the other party wanted to win by any means. Even the rules of the Triwizard Tournament originally allowed warriors to attack each other in this level in a blink of an eye, after getting rid of Krum and helping each other. Cedric and Harry finally saw the final trophy. Oh, my son, I'm so proud of you. Watching Cedric in the movie give up the glory that Hufflepuff had not received for 100 years because Harry had saved him before, Amos Diggory was stunned for a moment, but finally relieved. He knew that the movie would be somewhat different from reality, so he also thought about whether Cedric could win the final victory of the Triwizard Tournament in the movie. But now this result seems not bad, especially in the end. Harry chose to take the trophy in front of him with Cedric. However, in the dim scene of the screening room, Amos Diggory did not notice that his son's face became very ugly at this time. Chapter 353 Cedric and Number 039, S Death. When Harry and Cedric touched the trophy, everything around them was spinning. The two were taken to a strange place by the trophy. That was already a portkey. Seeing this scene suddenly, most of the audience in the screening room were confused at this moment, let alone Amos Diggory, who looked pleased just now. Cedric's eyes darkened, and the long-faded memory suddenly became vivid at this moment, and the words Adam said at that time seemed to ring in his ears. The Triwizard Tournament trophy has been made into a portkey, and on the other end of the portkey is Voldemort. Voldemort, Earth, Demon. Seeing the unknown creature in Peter Pettigrew's arms, the hairs on Cedric's back stood up. He saw himself in the movie raising his wand warily, and then, Avada Kindle, there was a flash of green light, and he was dead in the movie. Cedric. The sudden offline was so fast and cold, and the plot continued immediately without any pause, so that everyone didn't even have time to feel sad for Cedric's death in the movie. Without even a moment of mourning for Cedric's death, the one who immediately came to the battlefield was Voldemort, who was about to be resurrected. Although Adam said jokingly in the screening room, there were obviously people paying attention to this matter in the screening room. This is wrong. How could my son, Dad? Cedric quickly took out his wand and manually muted the sound around him. He smiled apologetically at the people who looked around, and then comforted his father, who was a little defensive around him. Dad, it's just a movie. Movies? Yes, movies, Amos. Diggory looked at Cedric and nodded, then pulled Cedric to stand up. Let's go. What kind of movie is this? It's just nonsense. We won't watch it. However, this pull did not pull Cedric, Amos. Diggory couldn't help but look at Cedric in disbelief. Dad, I want to continue reading. Cedric turned to look at the screen. At this time, Peter Pettigrew had obtained all the elements needed for Voldemort's resurrection. The crucible exploded under the fluctuation of magic power, and the potion inside condensed into a pale and strange body. Was that what happened to Harry after he got the trophy? Cedric's eyes flickered and he said, I believe that Adam did not create this series of movies for no reason. Speculations like this have been mentioned in newspapers before, but have often been dismissed by others as overthinking the fact that it's just a few movies. If Cedric was still unsure before this, then after seeing his own death, he vaguely agreed with this speculation. Adam would not write him to death in the movie for no reason. At the same time, looking back and analyzing carefully now, Adam did behave a little strangely during the Triwizard Tournament, especially in the last level. Cedric recalled his experience of being imprisoned in a special maze by Adam at the last level. At that time, Adam was clearly afraid that he would run away and win the championship. For this reason, he even did not hesitate to let him hit the walls and jump up and down in the maze. Recalling his embarrassing appearance and the terrible experiences along the way, Cedric's eyelids twitched and he felt that the weight in his heart had been relieved a lot. No, what are you talking about? Cedric, this is just an illogical story made up at random. There was a bit of a smile on Amos Diggory's face. He tried his best to bring ridicule to his smile, but in fact he only let his face stiffly pull upward. Okay, let's finish it. After all, we spent money. In the end, Amos Diggory was defeated by his son's firm gaze and gave up the idea of leaving. Cedric let out a sigh of relief and turned to watch the movie seriously. The resurrected Voldemort summoned other Death Eaters through Pettigrew's dark mark, and now he is immersed in the joy of being successfully resurrected and being able to touch Harry after venting his anger. Voldemort challenged Harry, the boy who had almost killed him, to a duel. So, this is what he was thinking about after he was resurrected. Professor Grindelwald blinked and looked at Voldemort, who was laughing happily while torturing Harry with Crucio, with only confusion in his eyes. Voldemort is an extremely egoistic person. Harry once caused his greatest failure, so Harry became his obsession and his nightmare. Looking at the screen, Professor Dumbledore's fingers trembled slightly, but his voice remained very calm. Professor Grindelwald heard this and turned to look at him. You really know your students. It's a pity that I understood it too late, and I didn't teach him well. Professor Dumbledore suddenly sighed. Although Adam's concept of education was not explicitly stated after the restructuring of Hogwarts, he did not hide it at all. A good education can change a person's life. Hogwarts is a boarding school, and the students living here are in a stage of shaping their outlook on life. Professors should pay more attention to the students' psychological and moral status. Before, there were only a few professors in Hogwarts. It was indeed a bit beyond their ability to manage the entire school and ask them to pay attention to the daily life of students while being responsible for teaching. But now, the number of professors in Hogwarts is definitely enough. Grindelwald looked at Professor Dumbledore, who was in a low mood, and was about to say something. He saw Harry finally muster up the courage to face Voldemort. Then he used the disarming spell and stalemate with Voldemort's killing curse. Professor Grindelwald, thinking that Grindelwald once dominated the European and American wizarding world, and almost successfully broke the statute of secrecy and led wizards to declare war on muggles. What big scenes had he not seen? But now looking at the two beams of light, one green and one red, stalemate together, Professor Grindelwald had to admit, he really had never seen this scene. Is this paragraph really not an artistic process? I don't think so, Gellert. I wonder if you remember, Professor. Dumbledore looked at the screen with a gloomy look. When Harry bought the wand in the first movie, the shopkeeper mentioned the description of the core of Harry's wand: phoenix, tail feathers, and the tail feathers of the same phoenix were made into another wand. Professor Grindelwald's eyes flickered. Although he didn't know the specific situation of the twin wands, his magical knowledge was enough for him to analyze enough information. So, if the cores of the opposing wands come from the same creature, the spells of both sides will not take effect. but will produce such a confrontation. This, Professor Grindelwald suddenly had a wonderful idea, then he gave up the idea the next moment. Who knows what magical animal the core of the old wand comes from? Chapter 354. The funeral was well done, don't do it again next time. This situation is called twin wands. They are doomed to be unable to hurt each other. Professor Dumbledore suddenly thought of something when he said this, and he couldn't help but pause it, and then he continued naturally. Not only that, the spell confrontation between the twin wands will also trigger a strange effect. Spell flashback. Flashback to the previous spell. Grindelwald was stunned, and then understood. So that's it. This kid relied on this to escape. Is it a coincidence? Grindelwald suddenly frowned. Once is a coincidence, twice is a coincidence, then it can't be a coincidence every time, right? Compared to other passers-by who don't know the truth, they know more about Adam's abilities and are almost sure that these movies are not that simple. At least they are definitely not some random fictional stories apart from anything else. There is now a pair of Grindelwald and Dumbledore from a parallel time and space in Hogwarts, which is enough for them to imagine these movies. On this question, a sentence from our new divination professor may be able to answer your questions. Professor Dumbledore said, there are no coincidences in this world. Every so-called coincidence is actually inevitable. Are there no coincidences in the world, Professor? Grindelwald pointed his finger at the armrest and continued to watch the movie while thinking. In the movie, the confrontation between the twin wands has caused a flashback of the spell, and the projections of those killed by Voldemort's wand are ejected from the tip of Voldemort's wand. They whispered beside Harry to fight for a moment of departure for him, including Harry's parents and Cedric, who had just died. With the help of those projections, Harry took Cedric's body and the Portkey trophy back to the last level of the Triwizard Tournament. At the same time, cheers and celebratory music rang in Harry's ears. Oh my God! Amos Diggory couldn't help but cover his mouth, tears blurring his vision. Before his vision blurred, he saw himself cheering on the screen, because Cedric appeared with Harry and the trophy. That performance was so real that it made him feel creepy. It was just like everything he had shown in the previous movie. It was like another self, and he didn't feel any sense of disobedience at all at this moment. The joy around him and Harry's sadness formed a great conflict, a dramatic conflict, a conflict that made people feel great sadness. Really good. I was still thinking about how he would express the grief of the child's death. This scene is more impactful than simple sadness and crying, Professor Grindelwald said halfway, and swallowed it back after seeing Professor Dumbledore staring at the screen in a daze. That's just a movie. The same statement, but it means different things to people who know different information. Even if these movies really have a deeper meaning, they are not the reality they are in after all. I know, Professor Dumbledore continued to watch the movie. Harry, who was in grief, was taken away by Professor Moody. Although he was still immersed in grief and the shock of seeing Voldemort resurrected, Harry was still keenly aware of the flaws in Professor Moody's words. Then Professor Dumbledore and others broke in, and Professor Moody's identity was revealed. His identity was actually Barty Crouch Jr. Is there no normal person among the Defense Against the Dark Arts professors at Hogwarts? A wizard couldn't help but sigh. Professor Dumbledore couldn't help but look in that direction. But after thinking about the several Defense Against the Dark Arts professors from the time Harry entered school to the time he handed over the position of principal to Adam, he retracted his gaze. This question is really not easy to answer. He can only say that the current Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore's eyes involuntarily glanced to the side, is still competent. Cedric breathed a sigh of relief. According to the rhythm of the previous few movies, after the climax and the execution of the chief culprit, it should be the bonus link of the year-end dinner. He looked at his girlfriend and father, who looked unhappy, whispered a few words of comfort and prepared to leave in a while. But Cedric didn't expect that his previous experience would start to fail in this episode. Seeing that there was a scene where Professor Dumbledore gave a eulogy for him in front of the whole school, Cedric was numb. What is this? Is it his preferential treatment as an acquaintance and friend of Adam? Luxurious funeral service. All the teachers and students of the school attended your funeral, and Professor Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of this century, personally gave a eulogy for your funeral. Not really. Really not. Cedric felt that if he really died, he would not be able to meet the standard of funeral even if you had already booked a one-dragon banquet from Adam. There was no need to prepare a rehearsal for him so long in advance, right? Why couldn't he change it to his wedding with Zhang Chu? Cedric thought that he was probably the first wizard to see his own funeral alive, but soon Cedric had no time to think about it. Seeing his girlfriend and father completely burst into tears, Cedric put on a mask of pain. How should he comfort his father and girlfriend who were moved to tears by his funeral? At this moment, Adam, who had watched the show with satisfaction, left the scene. This movie will inevitably cause greater fluctuations than before, not only because of Cedric's death, but also because this movie tells a lot of past that everyone has never known, especially the clips of Voldemort's resurrection. When Harry said these words before, the Daily Prophet pointed out that they were lies. Later, after everyone really realized that Voldemort was resurrected, who would pay attention to what Harry said specifically? For a time, countless newspapers rushed to report the premiere of the movie. However, there were so many parts worth mentioning in the whole movie that many pages of a newspaper reported from different angles and in different forms, but they still couldn't make it clear. The itchy wizards had to bite their teeth and start scrambling for tickets to see what this particularly sensational movie was about. On Monday, a good day to start work again after a short break, when Harry walked into the Ministry of Magic, he found that the eyes of the people around him were a little bit wrong. It always felt like there was a bit of pity. Harry soon realized where this pity came from and couldn't help but roll his eyes secretly. Everyone, be rational. It's really just a movie. Cedric is still alive and well, and he's in the department for the regulation and control of magical creatures on the 3rd floor. At the same time, Harry couldn't help but feel a little sympathy for Cedric. He didn't know what kind of look he would get walking into the Auror Command Center. Harry thought he could finally breathe a sigh of relief, but he didn't expect Ron to see him and quickly put away the things in his hand. Oh. Hey Harry, good morning. Good morning, Harry. Approached Ron suspiciously and saw Ron hiding the things behind him more tightly with an awkward smile. What is that? What is what? Ron blinked and tried to fool around, but it was obvious that he didn't have the appearance of his sister. Harry made a feint to the east and snatched the things away. Oh, it's a pity that you don't play Quidditch, brother. Ginny has already devoted herself to the Quidditch career. As for me, forget it. Sing the opposite tune. Harry frowned when he saw the things he had snatched from Ron. Chapter 355. Don't say I didn't warn you. Ron was just reading the Quibbler, and was afraid of being discovered by himself. Thinking of the nature of this magazine, Harry suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart, and quickly opened the magazine, perhaps because of the traces left by Ron staying on a page for too long before. Harry flipped directly to a certain page, and the huge headline on the top directly attracted Harry's attention. Shock. The movie you must watch in your life. The Dark Lord Voldemort is naked in front of the boy who lived. Puff. Harry almost vomited blood. Slander. This is a blatant slander. He will sue the Quibbler for defamation. But then he saw a movie photo, which was when Voldemort had just been resurrected. It was indeed in front of him, and it was indeed naked. Harry, that's not right. Harry suddenly found the point. Didn't the Dream Cinema forbid filming of movie content? Did Adam sue him? Harry thought again. Could it be that Adam didn't subscribe to the Quibbler? It's very likely. I'll write him a letter to report it, although he and Adam rarely contact each other now. Hedwig and Harry still on good terms. They have given birth to 2 cubs. No, Ron couldn't help but remind him, the Quibbler is authorized by the Dream Cinema to report on movie content, but each issue is limited to 3 photos. This, Harry couldn't help but say, why did the Dream Cinema authorize the Quibbler? I remember that even the Daily Prophet and the Wizard's Journal didn't have it. Maybe it's because the Quibbler is willing to give all the income from these issues to the Dream Cinema. After deducting the expenses, Ron took the Quibbler magazine and turned to a page at the back to show Harry. Harry took it over again and found that not only did the revenue from these issues go to the Dream Cinema, but even a quarterly or even yearly subscription to the Quibbler also came with coupons for the Dream Cinema's peripherals, package exchange coupons, and movie ticket exchange coupons. Other newspapers and magazines probably wouldn't be so cruel to spend so much money on sales. Ron shook his head. Inside, Harry was speechless, and at the same time he felt a black screen in front of his eyes. In this way, the sales of the Quibbler will obviously usher in a surge, and the Quibbler was originally a very popular publication in the wizarding world. He couldn't imagine how many people would see the report now. Fortunately, there's only one report. The entire Quibbler should have a lot of reports about this movie, and there are also 3 photos. Everyone's attention should not be focused on me. Harry barely comforted himself. No, this time all 3 photos are about you. Ron looked at Harry with a little sympathy. Harry gasped and couldn't help but open the Quibbler again. It wasn't hard to find it because of the photos. The first love of the boy who survived was actually, the picture was a screenshot of Harry inviting Zhang Chu to the ball but being rejected. Harry Potter may have turned his target due to emotional injury. The picture was a screenshot of Harry saving Ron and Fleur's sister in the second round of the Triwizard Tournament and being kissed by Fleur. Just looking at the title and the picture, Harry's face turned pale, and he was even a little afraid to look at it. How can they talk nonsense like this? Ahem. Think about it, Harry. Aren't these newspapers and magazines all nonsense? Ron had no choice but to comfort Harry like this. However, Harry took a deep breath and felt that if he held back for a while, he would get angrier and angrier. If he took a step back, he would feel worse. Did Adam just let everyone talk nonsense about his movie? I'm going to write him a letter after I get home today. In response, Adam wrote back, I've already treated you very well by deleting the kiss between you and Zhang Chu after Cedric's death. Otherwise, you should be being hunted by Cedric now, instead of having time to write to me. Harry. Who received the letter? ? I'm not. I didn't. You slandered me. However, Harry, who had already vaguely felt that these movies were not simple, couldn't help but feel a little guilty. On the other hand, after discussion, the Ministry of Magic issued a notice on goblins, which detailed that goblins relied on powerful weapons to try to start a war against wizards. The British Ministry of Magic strongly condemned this kind of bad behavior that destroyed peace and provoked war. The notice then stated that the goblin conspiracy had been broken by a clever and powerful wizard, and specifically attached the news that the wizard would join the teaching team of Hogwarts at the beginning of the next Hogwarts new school year, and emphasized that the wizard would be responsible for teaching ancient magic. At the end of the notice, the British Ministry of Magic strictly ordered the remaining goblin remnants to surrender at the location designated by the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry of Magic will give them a fair trial. Otherwise, don't say I didn't warn you. In addition, another notice was also issued, which was about the establishment of the Wizard Bank, located at the original site of Gringotts. The Wizard Bank will assume all the banking business that Gringotts was originally responsible for in the international mysterious world. The former notice is much more important, but for the wizards in the British wizarding world, the latter is more important. Before this, many wizards were very worried about the disappearance of Gringotts. Can they get back the money they deposited in Gringotts? Can the previous currency still be used? Even if the Ministry of Magic temporarily set up a team to take on the previous work of Gringotts and inherited the vault data of Gringotts, the wizards still can't be completely relieved, because there is always a temporary in front of that team. Now there is finally a definite and final solution. And the wizards are relieved. As for the mysterious side of the world, they are naturally more concerned about the previous notice of the British Ministry of Magic. After translating the content of the notice, it becomes, the British Ministry of Magic sent a wizard to beat the goblins to the point of almost extinction, and then asked the remaining goblins to surrender to the Ministry of Magic, otherwise they would continue to fight. Not to mention the authenticity of the news that only one wizard was sent. The fact that the British Ministry of Magic beat the goblins to the point of almost extinction must be true, and there should not be many casualties, otherwise it would not be concealed at all. As for the current situation of the goblins, looking at the empty Gringotts and the fact that the goblins have not responded, you can basically guess one or two. For a moment, the magic ministries of all countries were silent. Everyone's current trend is getting weaker and weaker. How come you suddenly have a leap in strength? In addition, in the office of a mysterious eastern country, a middle-aged man looked at the notice and a question mark slowly appeared above his head. This notice, why does it look more and more familiar? Did the translator's subjective thoughts really not appear in the translation of this notice? We have verified this aspect, and there can't be any problems with the translation. The staff member on the side was a little embarrassed. In fact, this notice was originally in English and Chinese. Middle-aged man? ? Chapter 356 Elixir of Life. Regardless of the reaction of the mysterious world, Adam is now having afternoon tea with his brothers for the first time in a long time. Finally Colin is back, and everyone else is available. Who would have thought that among the two ministers of magic, a head of department of the Ministry of Magic, a business tycoon and a magizoologist, the busiest one would be the magizoologist, Bernard. Couldn't help but sigh. Is there anything difficult to understand about this? You all have many people working for you, and I am the only one living alone. Isn't it natural that I should be busier? This is your choice. You are alone amid Cologne's protests. Bernard picked up the fruit on the table and took a bite. Why is such a fragrant fruit not sweet at all? Bernard was silent for a second, chewed a few more mouthfuls of disbelief, then looked at Adam and asked a question that doubted his life. Is this really a fruit? It can't be a vegetable or something, right? Similar situations are not unknown. For example, Adam will eat vegetables such as cucumbers and tomatoes as fruits, and sometimes dip them in sauces. You should actually ask Colin about this. This is a souvenir he brought back from South America. Adam shook his finger to indicate that this thing had nothing to do with him, but he did recognize this thing. This is cantaloupe and eggplant, also called ginseng fruit. It is indeed a fruit. It is said to have high nutritional value, but I haven't eaten it much. After all, this thing can't be called unpalatable, but it can't be called delicious either, and it's also very expensive. Nutritional value, that's what fruit sellers say. The one with more is worse than the one with less. The ingredients are often several times more than those of other fruits. If you believe this, I might as well buy a cup of the elixir from Fantasy Cinema. Bernard shook his head and chose the cherry on the other side that had been pitted by the impurity removal curse. Would you like a drink now? Adam snapped his fingers, and 5 glasses of bright red liquid that looked like blood appeared on the table. Oh? That's okay, but I'm actually not very interested in those syrupy drinks without bubbles. Bernard took a sip from the glass and raised his eyebrows. Wow, is this a special edition? It tastes very sweet, like honey water, and a bit like coconut milk. No, it's a little sweeter than that. Then Bernard frowned and looked at the cherry stem in his hand. Strange, I just ate such sweet cherries. Why can I still drink it sweet? As we all know, if the foods eaten immediately after each other are of the same taste, then if the stronger one is eaten first, the lighter taste will be masked by the taste of the former. Is it possible that this glass of water is indeed very sweet, so you drink it now and taste the sweetness? Eugene took a drink and took a sip, and couldn't help but frown as well. This is not a light sweetness with a part of the sweetness covered up, but a very light sweetness that is very obvious. But Eugene was obviously more knowledgeable, and he quickly remembered something. Is it similar to the effect of a sweet dream? It's not sweet in taste, so it won't be overshadowed by other flavors. Bernard, who rarely goes to bars, BGO Adam snapped his fingers, smiled and let everyone taste it. This is a genuine elixir of life, different from the surroundings of Fantasy Cinema. Everyone smiled knowingly at this, just thinking that this was Adam's specially made sweet water for them, rather than the ordinary goods sold in bulk, but they didn't know that this was indeed the elixir of life. To be precise, it was the elixir of life plus elixir. Special thanks to Professor Snape for providing technical support. Cologne would have to wait until after the new year before going out again, so the party was not in a hurry. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye, and Adam came to the screening room with the excitement of watching a good show. Starting from this part, the water temperature is going to get hot. Adam could hardly hide his smile. I hope there won't be another accident this time. After finding a seat and sitting down, Harry couldn't help but clasp his hands in prayer. During this period of time, his life at the Ministry of Magic could be said to be very nostalgic, and he suddenly seemed to be back in time. The good news, this movie is so immersive. The bad news, the sense of immersion is limited to reality. Fortunately, overall, his life has not been affected too much. He just needs to ignore everyone's attention. On the contrary, it is Cedric. It is said that he has been very prosperous recently. Hope everyone is okay. JPG. Be open-minded. This is a movie after all. Ron patted Harry on the shoulder. Very good. I hope you will be as relieved after watching the next few movies. Adam retracted his gaze and continued to scan the other screening halls, seeing the Rhea targets. He was looking forward to one after another. Strange. Why isn't Hermione there? Are you working overtime today? Adam shook his head. Everyone has their own life. Besides, this is just the premiere, so there's nothing we can do about Hermione not coming at this moment. The movie has entered the beginning. Unlike every previous movie, the beginning of the movie was still cheerful. This time, Harry encountered a Dementor as soon as he started. Fortunately, Harry had already learned the Patronus charm that could deal with Dementors, but using magic in front of Muggles was a violation of the law of secrecy. For this reason, Harry directly received a letter of expulsion from Hogwarts. Why did the Dementors appear outside? I remember that the Ministry of Magic claimed that all the Dementors were in Azkaban. A wizard couldn't help but say, this can't be blamed on Harry. Hogwarts can't expel him for this. This movie gave everyone a shock right from the start. and Harry's experience obviously caused everyone's dissatisfaction. Is it Harry who is responsible for having to cast a spell to resist the Dementors in front of the Muggles? Should it be the person who caused the Dementors to appear in front of the Muggles? If Harry doesn't resist, will he just sit back and watch the Dementors kill or wait for death? You also said it was claimed. Don't forget who the Minister of Magic was at the time, the lying fudge. Another wizard couldn't help but roll his eyes and said, and the you-know-who had been resurrected at that time. Don't forget that the Dementors were once under the command of the you-know-who. The lying fudge was originally a name called out by a very popular gossip magazine. Because the entire report was too magical and full of ridicule, it was widely sung by people. Then a group of wizards appeared and took Harry away, including Professor Moody, who was familiar and unfamiliar to everyone. After all, the one that everyone was familiar with from the previous movie was a fake, and the real Moody's appearance time was almost negligible. Albus, is this really okay, Professor? McGonagall couldn't help but turn her head to look at Professor Dumbledore. The Order of the Phoenix is a secret organization, and it is openly displayed to everyone. There's nothing wrong with it, Minerva. Now there are no enemies that the Order of the Phoenix needs to deal with. It's not a bad thing to let everyone know what everyone in the Order of the Phoenix has done, Professor. Dumbledore was very open about this. After he knew that the new commemorative card was called Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he knew that the affairs of the Order of the Phoenix would be made public. As he said, there was nothing wrong with this. The Order of the Phoenix needs to keep it secret in order to deal with Voldemort. If there are really new enemies, there will naturally be new secret organizations to fight against them, although Professor Dumbledore doubts whether such enemies will appear again. Chapter 357 Umbridge with great destructive power. With Adam's current strength, and he still has the Philosopher's Stone, plus the ambition Adam has shown now, at least until Adam lives to the point where he doesn't want to live anymore, with his suppression, Professor Dumbledore can't imagine anyone threatening the entire world like Voldemort, unless that person is Adam. However, in that case, Professor Dumbledore feels that no organization can fight Adam. After all, Adam can travel through time and parallel worlds, so what's the point of fighting him? It's better to just vote. The situation of the Order of the Phoenix caused a sigh among the wizards. It turns out that there is such a force fighting Voldemort. Although some people knew that Dumbledore led a force to fight Voldemort before, they didn't know that they were called the Order of the Phoenix, and the hearing that took place not long after showed everyone how fair the so-called Wizengamit's verdict was. Fortunately, our court is different now than before, when the wizards around couldn't help but feel indignant. A wizard couldn't help but sigh. Then, you probably haven't been to the current court in person, eh? Wizard whispered. Even if it's for justice, it's too scary to cut out the heart at every turn. In fact, I remember that truth serum is also an option. Why do you have to choose that scale? Another wizard spoke in a low voice, causing the wizard who spoke in front to pause and hesitate for a long time before saying, Who knows whether what they said about no side effects is true or false? As soon as the voice fell, several sneers came from the dim surroundings. All statements from the court were made under the judgment of Anubis's scale. How could there be lies? As for the reason why the wizard chose Anubis's scale instead of truth serum, they knew it without much explanation. The wizard news had already said it when listing the advantages and disadvantages of the two choosing Anubis's scale. Although the heart must be cut out, at least the scale only measures whether you lied. There is still room for wording in the specific answer, but the truth serum is just asking whatever you're asked. So those who have done a lot of bad things, in order to prevent you from saying something you shouldn't say and increase your workload, it is better to choose Anubis's scale, which is good for both of us. From the Rule of Law section of the Wizard newspaper, in order to maintain the stability of the wizarding world, and combined with the comprehensive consideration of the previous Rule of Law environment, the new Ministry of Magic will not excessively trace back to the past, unless the parties sue you in court or you jump out and admit the crime. Therefore, everyone just sneered at the wizard, and then turned their attention to the movie in order to avoid interference from Professor Dumbledore. The Ministry of Magic deliberately brought forward the hearing, but unexpectedly, Professor Dumbledore had anticipated it and came 3 hours earlier, and the facts proved that the Ministry of Magic actually made sense to do so. Professor Dumbledore brought important witnesses to prove that Dementors did appear at the time. The members of the Wizengamot, who were originally dissatisfied with the Ministry of Magic's obvious targeting of Harry, agreed to withdraw the charges against Harry. The power of the Ministry of Magic and the Wizengamot is not enough to directly reverse right and wrong, which makes the wizards feel relieved from this point of view. The past Wizengamot court is not so dark, At least there is still some justice. Several wizards couldn't help but point to the witch who took the lead in correcting the chaos in the movie and whispered excitedly, "That's Ms. Bones. One of the 5 current senior judges. She is a Hufflepuff." I remember her. Harry looked nostalgic, and then when he saw Umbridge's close-up, he couldn't help but black out. Although I knew that she would definitely be in this movie before I came, I still regret watching this movie now. Think about it in a good way. These are all things in the past, and don't you want to know more? Ron patted Harry's hand. "Thank you, I feel comforted. If you can take off the blindfold before saying this, I will feel better." Harry glanced at Ron speechlessly as expected. Umbridge's power is magical and powerful. This woman caught the attention of all the audience in just a few minutes of appearance, and disgusted everyone. "I'll go out for some fresh air, Professor." McGonagall couldn't help but stand up. To be honest, she couldn't bear it anymore. The damage caused by Umbridge and Lockhart is completely 2 levels. If Lockhart himself is not on the scene, it would be funny to watch, but Umbridge is the kind of very special, even the bystander will be hurt. "Ahem, I'll go out to buy some food, Professor." Grindelwald also stood up leisurely. He is not like Professor Dumbledore, who has a special purpose for this movie and must watch it. He may not come back before the end of the movie. Professor Dumbledore's side suddenly became empty. Strictly speaking, all the screening rooms are a bit empty at this time, which is even more than the last time Professor Lockhart appeared. Adam of course kindly called the manager to ask him to send a few more security guards to maintain order and told everyone not to leave the theater unless they had any consumption needs. Alice, lamenting that none of the 2 people were reliable, Professor Dumbledore had to bear the pain alone. Fortunately, the portrayal of Umbridge then entered a montage. Each section did not have an in-depth description or record, but instead used a splicing of fragments to show what Umbridge did in the next period of time. The depressing content combined with the bright background music successfully allowed the audience to experience the delicate balance point of maintaining disgust but feeling able to stand. This rhythm continued until Umbridge fired Professor Trelawney. To be honest, Professor Trelawney's prediction at the time seemed to be quite accurate. Harry couldn't help but open his eyes and nodded, then turned his head to see that Ron's eye patch was still on, and couldn't help but twitch his eyelids, raised his hand and took off Ron's eye patch. In fact, if you look at it more, you will feel much better after you get used to it. If you don't believe it, try it. Really, Ron forgot to snatch the eye patch back for a while, looked at the screen, and saw Umbridge's hypocritical smile at first glance, and couldn't help squinting his eyes. "Look at it more," Harry said, while turning his back to Ron and closing his eyes again. "Okay, I'll try." The conflict and repression segment reached a climax in a conversation between Professor Dumbledore and Umbridge that was infinitely close to tearing each other apart, and then entered a smooth stage. Harry took everyone to learn defense against the dark arts in the Room of Requirement first. They had their first gathering at the Hog's Head, then Dobby discovered the Room of Requirement, and then they went to the more secluded Room of Requirement for training. "I remember our first gathering was at the Storm Restaurant." Harry couldn't help but sigh. Ron nodded, then subconsciously glanced at Harry, only to find that Harry had his eyes closed. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358. As we all know, Ron, Harry, aware of the strong gaze, Harry opened his eyes, saw Ron looking at him and spoke calmly. "My eyes are a little sore. Close your eyes and take a moment." "Why are you looking at me suddenly, Ron? I believe you." Although he didn't pursue the matter further, Ron glanced at Harry from time to time, causing Harry to have to look at the screen again with the exciting background music. There is another montage about how relaxed and comfortable everyone is training defense against the dark arts in the Room of Requirement, which is in sharp contrast to the previous one. The audience also breathed a sigh of relief and was finally in the mood to eat some popcorn and drink. However, as the saying goes, if you want to add a little salt to the sweetness, a little contrast with another flavor can better reflect the main tone of the film. Obviously, most viewers have not figured out the main tone of this movie. Mr. Weasley was seriously injured, and Harry, who had had a foreboding about this before, almost collapsed. Professor Dumbledore looked at himself, who ignored this in the movie, and couldn't help but sigh. "Maybe I'm really not a good teacher. I think you did the right thing, Professor." Grindelwald came back at some point, holding a bucket of popcorn in his arms, for the greater good, isn't it? After sitting down, Professor Grindelwald smiled meaningfully. It is obvious that Professor Dumbledore in the movie is only interested in dealing with Voldemort. He sensed that Harry might have some connection with Voldemort and therefore chose not to let Harry know anything, but ignored the psychological pressure that Harry was under. Professor Dumbledore, I was already in a bad mood, but after being comforted by Grindelwald like this, I suddenly felt even worse. Especially Professor Dumbledore knew, his mentality at the time was indeed as Grindelwald said, regarding the elimination of Voldemort as a more important thing, and ignoring Harry's feelings. Lies won't hurt. The truth is the sharpest knife in the movie. Although Professor Dumbledore did not notice Harry's feelings, he responded to Harry's ability to sense Voldemort's side by asking Professor Snape to teach Harry a clumancy. Wait, it can't be right. Seeing that the movie even showed what Professor Snape had read, Harry couldn't help but widen his eyes. He knew very well what accident happened after that. Even now, he was afraid that Professor Snape would suddenly appear from that place and give him an avatar to silence him. Is it really okay for Adam to do this? The scene changed and Arthur, who had been seriously injured before, returned home. Harry was not surprised after all. The accident hadn't happened yet, but just because of such speculation, Harry couldn't help but think about it when watching the plot of the subsequent movie. God, will Professor Snape really not kill people indiscriminately? By then, Harry seemed to see the wizarding world turning into a river of blood again. What's wrong? Ron looked at Harry, who narrowed his eyes suspiciously. This guy would not want to close his eyes again. But now Umbridge has not appeared for a while. Why should he close his eyes? Nothing. Harry felt uneasy and couldn't help but adjust to his sitting position. As the movie continues, the tight-lipped Hagrid, while mumbling that this is a top secret, reveals what Professor Dumbledore told him to negotiate with the Giants. The audience has become somewhat accustomed to this. Hagrid's ability to keep secrets has now become a slang term in magazines like The Quibbler, used to describe people who are unable to keep secrets. However, as soon as the scene changed, it was a scene of Azkaban being breached and the felons escaping. The audience knew clearly who did this. It must be Voldemort rescuing those loyal to him. Among them, Bellatrix, who is represented, is a well-known die-hard loyalist to Voldemort. What makes the audience angry is that the Ministry of Magic still insists that Voldemort's resurrection is a lie, and blames Sirius for the breach of Azkaban. Of course, part of this anger was due to their shame and annoyance at the time for believing the nonsense told by the Daily Prophet, so there is no way of knowing the news of the Death Eater's escape from prison caused a huge stir. Among them, Neville was focused on in the movie. His parents were once members of the Order of the Phoenix, and were later tortured to madness by Bellatrix's Cruciatus curse. Is a perfect example of how brutal Death Eaters can be from every angle. Professor Longbottom, who was sitting in his seat, had a subtle expression on this, but he didn't feel like he was being stabbed. After all, his parents could now stay awake for more than 2 hours a day. It's just that this kind of experience of being the center of the movie scene is something that a person with a low-key personality like him can't get used to, no matter how many times he does it. Starting with Voldemort's invasion of Azkaban, the tone of the movie once again became heavy, and then reached another extreme. With the help of the informer, Umbridge captured the students in the room of requirement. In order to protect the students and not leave any clues to the Ministry of Magic, Professor Dumbledore claimed that those students were organized by him, and then knocked down the people from the Ministry of Magic and left with the help of Fawkes. However, this didn't seem to have much effect. Without Professor Dumbledore, and with the help of the Ministry of Magic, Umbridge's power at Hogwarts expanded again. Educational orders were hung on the walls of Hogwarts, and even portraits would be taken down for violating the educational orders. The closed door of Hogwarts gave people an atmosphere that was even more depressing than Azkaban. The last time the door was closed during filming, it was because of Sirius. The professors were trying to protect the students. A wizard couldn't help but sigh, realizing that the contrast in this movie seemed to be everywhere. In addition to contrast, there is another technique that is also everywhere in the movie. That is, after every very depressing plot, there is always a calmer plot to let the audience take a breath. For example, everyone practiced defense against the dark arts in the room of requirement. For example, Hagrid introduced his younger brother Grok to Harry and the others. It can only be said that bringing a giant to Hogwarts is too outrageous. Most of the audience couldn't help but have a lot of questions when they saw this, with only a small number of exceptions. Some of them had known about this for a long time, while others, it's just right. A wizard sighed, I was wondering why Hagrid didn't bring out any dangerous animals in this movie. Now it's just right. The Wizard next to him was very upset, but he looked back and recalled carefully the three-headed dog and the dragon in the first movie, the acromantula in the second movie, the hippogriff in the third movie, and the exploding Scroot in the fourth movie. The wizard's eyelids twitched. The boy who lived is also known as Hagrid and his dangerous magical creatures. There are more strange hidden threads. Harry also heard the wizard sigh, and felt a lot of complaints, but Harry didn't have time to think about it. Soon looking at himself learning brain occlumency from Professor Snape on the screen, and looking at himself who couldn't help but refute Professor Snape's ridicule, Harry's expression couldn't be held back for a moment. Adam, are you serious? Chapter 359. The pot starts to bubble. Snape, snot-nosed, enough, accompanied by Professor Snape's cold shout in the movie. Harry sitting in the screening room turned as pale as Harry in the movie back then. He suspected that he might be silenced by Professor Snape. In the end, it might be because of Professor Dumbledore that Professor Snape let him go, and now, he only doubted that Professor Snape would one day silence him, although he knew he was innocent. Things that only Professor Snape and he knew were made into a movie, and there was almost no need to doubt what Professor Snape would think of him. Here I go, Harry, is that true? Ron turned to look at Harry with a stiff face. When he saw the pale face, he swallowed hard, nodded and turned his head back. It seems to be true. No. Harry took a deep breath, grabbed Ron by the collar and pulled him back to him, looking at Ron fiercely. This section is fictional in the movie. This section must be fictional in the movie. Now Harry can only hope that this past that only he and Professor Snape know and no one else can confirm is a movie fiction. Maybe Professor Snape can spare his life as for why the past shown in the fictional fragments is real. It is a matter of life and death. Harry's mind is spinning very fast. Although not many people know about Professor Snape's student days, it is not completely unknown. They knew the secrets, and they always had classmates who knew something about them. In short, he can't take the blame. Otherwise, with Professor Snape's minus 1000 favorability towards in which he inherited from his father, Harry will have to take turns standing guard with both eyes when he sleeps from now on. Thinking of this, Harry couldn't help but think back to the school bully, which left him with such a debt. As a result, his own father was targeted in potions class and had to retake the exam, and he felt very complicated. He himself was a child who was bullied since he was a child, and he felt the same way about Professor Snape's experience. But this did not completely dispel his dissatisfaction with being targeted in the potions class. Instead, he felt a little more obviously, I was being bullied. But it seems that I am the one who is wronged. I feel aggrieved. It can only be said that fortunately, with Principal Gandalf here, Professor Snape did not dare to go too far. At most, he would be asked to retake the exam at the beginning of next semester, so that he would not really have to repeat the grade. Otherwise, those 5 years of retaking potions would become the most unforgettable 9 years of his 7 years at Hogwarts. Before Harry's unforgettable experience was over, the movie started the classic routine again, a depressing plot followed by a relaxing plot to ease the audience's mood before the OWLS exam. Fred and George went directly to a grand fireworks show. Fireworks made of dragons flew in the auditorium, and meteors with colorful sparks flew in the corridors. The emotions that had been suppressed for a long time seemed to burst out at this moment. Each of the students forgot about the exam for a while and fell directly into the carnival for a moment. Umbridge became surprisingly angry. She pulled out her wand and planned to get rid of the fireworks. However, after the fireworks were cast by a spell, instead of disappearing, they exploded even more powerfully, chasing Umbridge up and down in response. The professors all smiled and turned a blind eye to this scene that violated many school rules. Professor McGonagall even told Peeves that he had turned the chandelier in the wrong direction. Everyone in the screening hall was also infected by the atmosphere in the movie. They couldn't help but cheer together with the people in the movie, especially when they saw Umbridge being blown up by fireworks. They burst into hearty laughter. Oh my God. I have heard about this, but now that I have seen it with my own eyes, I still regret that I was not there. Professor Dumbledore also had a smile on his face, and at the same time there was a bit of regret that could not be concealed. After a few seconds, Professor Dumbledore turned his head and looked at Professor McGonagall, who was smiling and applauding. Was it really so lively at that time? In fact, it's even more lively. Hearing Professor Dumbledore's question, Professor McGonagall's smile became even brighter. After hearing this answer, Professor Dumbledore's whole face wrinkled up, as if he had stuffed a handful of sour taste into his mouth. Sugar. Fred, were we really this handsome back then? Believe me, George, you were so handsome back then. The Same to you, Fred. And George didn't expect that their experience would be recorded in the movie, and it was obviously a small climax. They couldn't help but excitedly high-five each other. Wow, seeing the joyful scene, Arthur Weasley couldn't help but cheered and gave his two sons a high-five. Then they felt a cold feeling on their backs, turned around and saw Mrs. Molly's death gaze. Mrs. Molly first glared at Arthur Weasley, making him look at the screen seriously, then looked at Fred and George. Is this the whole process of how you were expelled from Hogwarts that year, Fred? The two of them were sweating profusely under the blood pressure, but probably people would speed up their thinking in such a life and death crisis. Fred had an idea and said quickly, no. Umbridge is not the recognized principal of Hogwarts at all, and the expulsion order she issued does not count, as expected of the twins who had the most tacit understanding. As soon as Fred stood up, George immediately nodded and followed suit. Yes, Mother, and after Professor Gandalf succeeded as the headmaster, didn't he ask us to go back to Hogwarts to finish our studies? The two never dreamed that a painful experience that made them pound the table in the middle of the night would become their life-saving straw at this moment. Well, MRS. Molly still stared at them for a while, then smiled and hugged them with open arms. It's a prank. Well done, children. Oh, Mom, you really scared us. The two breathed a sigh of relief just when everyone was still immersed in the joy just now. The classic routine of the movie came again after the excitement. The repressed emotions followed. Harry was deceived by the soul letter, and through the connection with Voldemort, he saw the scene of Sirius Black being tortured by Voldemort, and believed it to be true. Harry didn't have much emotional fluctuations when he saw this part, but just sighed that he was really scared at the time. Fortunately, Professor Gandalf happened to pass by and saved Sirius. Harry, who didn't know that Professor Gandalf was Adam, naively thought that in this series of movies, Adam only erased his own influence and would not involve Professor Gandalf. So, Adam took out a whetstone and a kitchen knife from somewhere and started sharpening them. After so many movies, are you ready to take my knife? The death of Cedric in the previous movie was actually a wake-up call, telling everyone that this series of movies would not always have a happy ending. But the previous stereotypes made everyone fail to notice the reality of the water getting hot. So at this moment, everyone also didn't notice that although the water around them was not boiling, bubbles had begun to appear at the bottom of the pot. Chapter 360 Draco, this is so funny. I'm going to kill Professor Dumbledore? With Hermione's wit, everyone saw the tragic scene of Umbridge being taken away by centaurs, which was very satisfying. Then, accompanied by exciting music, Harry and his team got rid of the obstacle and rode the Thestral to the Ministry of Magic in London to save Sirius. Harry couldn't help but close his eyes under the exciting background music. It's really, I can't bear to look at how reckless I was back then, although Sirius later said that it was not his fault but that creature, who told Harry the false news under the orders of Bellatrix, should be blamed. Harry was obviously not relieved so easily. Fortunately, in the end, Sirius? Question mark. Watching the movie with the ending credits already playing, Harry sat there with question marks above his head. No. Where is my godfather? Where's my godfather who is so big? Exclamation mark. It stands to reason that the follow-up to Sirius being rescued by Professor Gandalf should be explained later, right? You can't just leave it to the next part and suddenly surprise everyone, right? Forcibly suppressing the foreboding feeling in his heart, Harry stood up and left with everyone else. In the next 2 weeks, as expected, there were many debates in the wizarding world. As the series progressed, the amount of information contained in the current movies became larger and larger, but Harry did not pay much attention to it. Even a little absent-minded when working, and the job of an Auror obviously does not allow for absent-mindedness. So when Harry stepped into the dream cinema 2 weeks later, he was not only surrounded by Ron, but also Sirius. The two of them helped Harry, who was still bandaged in several places, limply sit down on the seat. If you ask me, if you are injured like this, don't rush to the premiere. Sirius looked at Harry's stubborn eyes inside, holding his unbandaged hand. Look, I'm still alive and well, it's just a movie. Even so, everyone was already sitting here, so of course it was impossible to get up and leave now, so Sirius could only watch the movie together. At the beginning of the movie, there was an affair with Harry. Sirius couldn't help laughing while watching it, and he joked a few words with Harry, but Harry was always absent-minded. This wonderful state lasted until Professor Slughorn personally told the news that Sirius was dead. Sirius himself was fine, just feeling a little awkward, but Harry suddenly fell into depression after hearing the news. Harry, what's wrong with you? It's just a movie, Sirius didn't understand why Harry had such a big reaction. He was a big living person sitting in front of Harry. Why did it seem like Harry was already mourning for him? No, this is not simple. I think the movie may be too realistic, which makes Harry's sense of empathy too strong. It's okay. I'll comfort him, Ron spoke quickly to avoid the continuation of the already tense exchange between the two. The movie is still going on. It is obvious that this time there are few people in the audience who have made too strong comments on the plot of the movie, but they are watching it seriously, because even for the little wizard who was studying at Hogwarts at that time, now the plot has also entered an unfamiliar stage at this time. Hogwarts should have been taken over by Professor Gandalf, but now, looking at Professor Dumbledore who brought Harry to invite Professor Slughorn, everyone knows that the current principal of Hogwarts is still its Professor Dumbledore. Harry is sent to the Wheel Eyes by Professor Dumbledore, and Hermione and Ron express their parents' concerns about whether Hogwarts is still safe, which seems to set the tone for the entire movie. Oh my god, the screen is so dark that I can't see clearly. Sirius muttered something uncomfortable seeing that Fred George was actually running Weasley's Wizarding Wheezes at this time. Ron couldn't help complaining to Harry that this was untrue. Now there is no Atom to inject capital into them. Where will they get the money to buy a storefront in Diagon Alley? Halfway through the conversation, Ron saw the famous scene of Fred and George asking for their brother's price. No, I take back what I just said, Ron said expressionlessly. This is Fred and George alive. Don't ask him why. Just ask him that he has been to Wizarding Wheezes in real life. And they learned from the chat in the movie that the startup capital for Fred and George's Wizarding Wheezes workshop came from Harry's prize money from the Triwizard Tournament. If the storefront was rented instead of bought, the bonus would be enough. Harry was startled. It was like this again. This damn realism. He didn't have any other feelings about the prize money from the Triwizard Tournament. He just threw it into the vault and didn't care too much. But if Cedric died in the Triwizard Tournament and everyone always thought he was lying, this bonus will inevitably change in his eyes, making him unwilling to use the money. So the bonus was given to Fred and George, who dropped out of school, as startup capital for their dreams. This was so in line with his character. The subsequent scenes seemed to be about everyone's panic after Voldemort's resurrection, but Harry felt that these were more like foreshadowing. Even if other shops are closed, there is no reason why Mr. Ollivander's one shop should also be closed, especially from the movie. The whole Ollivander's one shop was directly abandoned. The ones that were originally piled up inside were nowhere to be seen, and the door was not even closed and was left open. Draco and his mother Narcissa, who appeared later, were even more suspicious. Now, all three of us have appeared. Narcissa was very open about this. After all, Lucius had a lot of scenes in the previous movies, and she was at most a cameo. I always have a bad feeling, Draco couldn't help but complain in a low voice. Even if it is a movie, it is impossible to make it up out of thin air. There are always some plots that are taken from reality. What was he doing in reality during that time? Well, at the beginning, Professor Gandalf took over from Professor Dumbledore and became the headmaster of Hogwarts. The whole Hogwarts was in the wave of reform. Later, after a little calm, in order for him to enter Hogwarts safely and get the protection of Professor Gandalf, his father taught him to ask Voldemort to enter Hogwarts and use his identity as a student to kill Professor Gandalf. So let's make an equivalent substitution. In the movie, he's going to kill Professor Dumbledore now? Exclamation mark. Thinking of this, Draco was amused by his own thoughts at that time. He volunteered to kill Professor Gandalf, which was an excuse to save his life, and now, kill Professor Dumbledore? Draco couldn't help but let out a low laugh again. How could it be possible? He really thought too much? Chapter 361. I Want to See a River of Blood. After the film's somewhat unsettling dark tone at the beginning, a period of peaceful school time followed. Harry also came out of his depression at this time and watched Professor Slughorn's potions class with some curiosity. Although this professor is currently teaching at Hogwarts, unfortunately this has nothing to do with him. Due to some factors, his potions professor was Professor Snape until he graduated from the 7th grade. In addition, there is another point that makes Harry feel a little better in reality. Because of the education reform at Hogwarts, the subject has only 3 possibilities: passing, repeating, and retaking, so I accidentally regained the qualification to attend the advanced potions class, which is the premise for becoming an Auror. Now I didn't expect that. I didn't experience the education reform in the movie, but I still got the qualification to enter the advanced potions class because of the change of potions professor. Could it be that I am destined to become an Auror? Then Harry saw the rare cool plot in recent movies, Relying on that old potion textbook, Harry was invincible in the potion class, won the first prize, and became famous. Well, in short, Harry, who was not good at potions, performed well all of a sudden, successfully brewed the living hell potion, and received praise and rewards from Professor Slughorn, a small bottle of Felix Felicis, which attracted the attention of his classmates. According to Professor Slughorn, in his past teaching career, there was only one person who succeeded in doing this besides Harry. Harry looked at himself in the movie who received the Felix Felicis and accepted the applause and congratulations from the classmates in front of him, and couldn't help showing some yearning in his eyes. If I had such a potion textbook back then, it would definitely surprise Professor Snape. Adam, who was watching him, couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he saw his thoughts. You're probably overthinking it, young man. Professor Snape would only frown suspiciously and then remember something, immediately check your textbook, and finally slap the textbook on the back of your head. Of course, the premise for this to happen is that you have to find the potion textbook. Adam reached into his pocket and fumbled for a long time before finding the old advanced potion making book from the bottom of the space. Harry didn't have time to look forward to it for too long. He saw Professor Dumbledore was going to show him his memory of Voldemort in the movie. This is exactly what he wanted to see when he chased this series. It's not Harry's fault that he was curious. The salvation plot of his later movies was completely cut off by Adam Director Reed and replaced with school homework and exams, which made Harry's previous years of targeting from Voldemort seem a bit incoherent. He was told that Voldemort wanted to kill him in the first year he came into contact with the magic world. Of course, he wanted to know what happened in the past and what the truth was behind his differences from other children over the years. However, what disappointed Harry was that in that memory, only Voldemort showed extraordinary magical talent when he was a child, and seemed to have signs of a dark heart at that time, which had nothing to do with him. But then Professor Dumbledore in the movie told Harry that Professor Slughorn had a close relationship with Voldemort when he was a student, and he had a very important memory about Voldemort. This is also an important reason why Professor Dumbledore asked Professor Slughorn to come back to teach somewhere in the screening room. Professor Slughorn, who was eating pineapple candied fruit, suddenly felt that the pineapple candied fruit in his mouth was not fragrant. He just thought that this movie was very popular now, and watching it could also enrich his conversation when he was with others. How did he suddenly eat melons? Exclamation mark. Professor Slughorn certainly knew what the memory mentioned in the movie was, so he was a little restless, but then he thought that Voldemort had been eliminated, so what was he afraid of? So Professor Slughorn breathed a sigh of relief and took another piece of pineapple candied fruit and stuffed it into his mouth. The next person to lose his happiness was Draco. The next part of the story where Draco came to the room of requirement and found the vanishing cabinet was a foreshadowing for others, but it was a clear indication for him. Draco in the movie wanted to do something big. Draco immediately put on a painful mask on his face. Would he really kill Professor Dumbledore? No matter what Draco felt, the movie continued to move forward. Hermione and Ginny were wary of the Half-Blood Prince's potion textbook because of the previous diary, but Harry, who had tasted the sweetness, held the book and studied it every day. As the days passed, their peaceful life was not unexpected. Why is it that every time something goes wrong, it's always you three? When Professor McGonagall said this, everyone in the theater couldn't help laughing. That's right, just looking at this movie, the three of them really get into trouble every year. Believe me, Professor, I've been wondering about this question for 6 years. After seeing Ron say this sincerely, everyone couldn't help laughing again. This really hits the nail on the head. The real Ron swallowed the popcorn in his mouth and pointed at himself in the movie. Then his face turned sour, because he mentioned in the movie that there was a boy who touched Ginny. Who is that? Ron turned his head and looked at Harry viciously. Harry was stunned. They had all graduated. Who could think of a person who had nothing to do with them? Sigh, it's a bit boring. Adam blew on the kitchen knife he had sharpened. Can you move in quickly? I want to see the blood flowing like a river. After carefully thinking about the next plot, Adam frowned. Before the key point, it seemed, it was basically the tortuous relationship history of Harry and Hermione, the best friends. Adam frowned, looked at the small table in front of him, and snapped his fingers. Before you bleed into a river, eat something delicious first. Fried chicken and cola ice cream, potato chips, spicy chips and crispy corners, egg tarts, chips and cornflakes. After discovering that he had exceeded 1.8 meters, Adam took the time to anchor his material dimension. Now he is not afraid of being unable to eat no matter how much he eats, and he is not afraid of being upset when he eats anything. This is how confident he is that his material dimension remains unchanged. Adam was eating happily, while Draco was already frowning through an exchange between him and Professor Snape in the movie. He knew that he in the movie was indeed planning to kill Professor Dumbledore, and he also said that he did not need Professor Snape's help. Lucius' expression on the side was also a little strange, but it was not because of his son's arrogant performance in the movie, but because he had sensed some of the unexplained logic in the movie. Draco mentioned one thing in the conversation just now, that is, he is the chosen one. It was obvious that the person who chose Draco had no other choice than Voldemort in the last movie. He, or Lucius in the movie, could be said to have been incompetent in the operations of the Department of Mysteries, so Voldemort chose Draco to kill Dumbledore. This is so consistent. Voldemort-style. Lucius frowned. Isn't this movie a little too realistic? Chapter 362, The Tide Turns. The person who invented puffed food really should be awarded a Nobel Prize. If the other party wants to, he can also be awarded the Order of Merlin, first class. After eating a bag of corn flakes, Adam smacked his fingers before cleaning them with a cleanser. After all, the powder on his fingers is one of the souls of puffed food. In addition, there are the first piece and the last bite. Raise your head and look again, Adam. What do I rely on? Oh, I remember, the part about the love potion. Adam blinked. Okay, I have forgotten this famous scene. Ron here and Harry who drank too much Felixir later. History is always surprisingly similar, so don't laugh at Harry anymore, otherwise it'll be awkward for a while. Of course Harry below couldn't hear Adam's words, so he was laughing so wildly now that he had no intention of stopping even after being held down and punched a few times by Ron. Yes. Ouch. I'm sorry, Ron. I couldn't help it. PFFT ha 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 ha. Harry laughed so hard that his glasses fell off his face. I can't help it. Ron's nymphomaniac look is really too funny. Ha 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 ha. Harry finally controlled himself, but when he put on his glasses, he saw Ron holding Professor Slughorn and wanting to have a drink with him. He laughed so hard that his hands shook and his glasses fell off again. Ha. Ha ha ha. It stands to reason that it is very rude to laugh like this in a movie theater, and it will easily attract everyone's attention, but when the whole movie theater laughs like this, there is no problem. Ron on the side had no reaction to this. He slumped in his seat silently, his eyes staring straight. When he finally accepted that this plot might become the next headline of the Daily Prophet, he saw himself in the movie taking a sip of the wine given by Professor Slughorn after drinking the antidote, and then vomiting. Modi fell down. So, in this movie, the boy who lived actually refers to me, right? Ron turned his head numbly, looked at Harry and tortured his soul. Harry was stunned for a moment and hesitated. If you like this title, I actually have no objection. Ron's sadness did not last long, and soon his attention turned to other things. First, he found out that the person who harmed him in the movie was Draco. Well, at least his subsequent poisoning was caused by Draco, and then he saw the famous scene where Harry was fucked by Ginny. You kid. Ron became furious on the spot, turned around and grabbed Harry's collar. Harry's face turned red when he saw that part, but now his face turned even redder after being pulled over by Ron. He couldn't breathe and was holding back. Ahem. Let go. Ginny took the initiative to kiss me. Oh. No, what am I talking about? Ron, please wake up. This is a movie. Harry quickly grabbed Ron's hand. Movie. Fictional. Ron paused. Oh, right, this is a movie, so you didn't kiss. Well, to be honest, Ginny and I are a couple now. What's the point of a kiss? Hearing Harry's whisper, Ron's eyes suddenly became sharp again. So you still kissed? Harry was about to cry but had no tears. What the hell was this? He and Ginny were really a serious couple now. Isn't kissing a normal thing? Fortunately, Sirius had finished watching the movie and settled matters, and the next part of the movie is the exciting part. The wind and water are changing. Oh no, the elixir is here. Harry looked at his performance after drinking the Felixir, with the same shock on his face as Ron and Hermione in the movie. Would it be like this after drinking the Felixir? Why do I feel like it's more like drinking alcohol? Sirius blinked and whispered, and it's hard liquor. Harry watched helplessly as he wandered around the castle in the movie as if he had drunk too much, doing one after another, completely confusing things. If the soles of these shoes were not strong enough, Harry's awkward toes would have dug a burrow into the basement of the screening room. It was getting late, and Harry in the movie took Professor Slughorn, who wanted him to return to the castle, to Hagrid's hut because Hagrid's Aragog died on this day. Professor Slughorn and Hagrid drank wine. Listening to Hagrid's stories about Aragog's past, the drunken Professor Slughorn he mentioned that he once raised a fish, but unfortunately it suddenly disappeared one day. At this point, he seemed to suddenly wake up from his wine, looked at Harry and told the story of the fish. It was a gift given to him by one of his students. It was a fish turned into a flower petal, and the magic on it was very subtle, but that day, the magic failed, and the fish disappeared. The person who gave him this gift was Harry's mother, and the day the fish disappeared was also the day Harry's mother was killed by Voldemort. Harry stared at the screen in a daze, the embarrassment just now completely gone from his mind. After that, what Harry said in the movie when he persuaded Professor Slughorn to give him the memory also made Harry realize that the Felixir did work under normal circumstances. It would be impossible for him to catch Professor Slughorn's moment of wavering and say those words that directly hit the other person's heart. Although Harry, who had drunk the Felix Felicis, did things that normal people could not understand, the results showed that there was indeed a reason. The funeral of Aragog they had experienced before, what Harry said now, and even the wine that Professor Slughorn had just drunk, softened Professor Slughorn's original firm determination. At this moment finally, Professor Slughorn took out the ampoule he carried with him, extracted the memory that Harry wanted, and gave it to Harry. At the same time, Professor Slughorn in the screening room closed his eyes, and a candied pineapple fell from his slightly trembling fingertips. Lily, as Professor Dumbledore poured those memories into the pensieve, Harry could not help but sit up straight. Almost all the audience were looking forward to what this memory that Professor Dumbledore called crucial was. Then they saw the process of Voldemort asking Professor Slughorn about Horcruxes. It can be seen that although Professor Slughorn at that time showed rejection of this extremely evil black magic and was surprised by Voldemort's question at that time, he still answered the question for the other party. After all, Voldemort did behave normally at that time. He was polite, loved to study, and had excellent grades. Who would have thought that he would really make a Horcrux? Then Harry and Professor Dumbledore discussed the Horcruxes. Voldemort made more than one Horcrux, and a small episode occurred at this time. Harry touched the ring on the table that Professor Dumbledore called one of the Horcruxes, and then Harry felt a little strange. Harry just thought it was because of the dark magic on the Horcruxes. Both Harrys thought so, but Sirius suddenly remembered that period of time. Professor Dumbledore asked them to hold back, saying that the time was not right. Chapter 363 The God of Fire leads the way. The time has not come. A vague reason for this reason, the Order of the Phoenix avoided a real large-scale conflict with Voldemort and the Death Eaters during that period of time, but no matter how they persuaded him, Professor Dumbledore always said the same thing: the time has not come yet. When is the time? Looking back carefully, Professor Dumbledore's opportunity to eliminate Voldemort was exactly after Harry was hit by Voldemort's death curse. Sirius looked at the screen in disbelief. Professor Dumbledore on the screen looked at Harry, his eyes slightly moist when Harry asked him if he was looking for Horcruxes when he was not in school. Professor Dumbledore looked at Harry and nodded, saying that he might have found another Horcrux, and that he could not destroy this Horcrux on his own at this time. Both Harrys thought that Professor Dumbledore was talking about the ring, but another Horcrux was found, but it may not necessarily be the second one. Could it be the third one? Sirius looked at Harry, who was still watching the movie seriously. The process of making a Horcrux is to hide a split soul in something. Professor Slughorn said that the way to split the soul is to kill someone, while Professor Dumbledore said that anything can be made into a Horcrux. Although it is difficult to recall, on the day that James and Lily died, Harry was completely consistent with the process of making Horcruxes. Harry, what? Harry was watching the movie seriously, and turned his head in confusion after hearing Sirius's words. Do you want some snacks? I'm going to buy some. Sirius hesitated for a moment but did not speak. It would be better to ask Professor Dumbledore later. Huh? Oh, okay. Harry didn't notice anything was wrong and reminded, when you buy things, you can buy each item separately, so that you can draw more commemorative cards. Okay. When Sirius came back, Harry was looking at the screen nervously, while other spectators around him were holding their breath and concentrating. What's going on? Sirius glanced at the extremely dark screen in confusion. He had just come in from outside and had not yet adapted to such a dark environment. He could only see something vaguely moving in the darkness. Professor Dumbledore is taking me to find Voldemort's Horcrux, Harry explained to Sirius quietly and concisely, and then took the popcorn and Coke from Sirius. Thanks, Harry handed the extra portion to Ron, then immediately turned to look at the movie Horcruxes. It turns out that to eliminate Voldemort, all Horcruxes must be eliminated. However, He didn't even know the existence of Horcruxes from beginning to end. An anonymous defense against the dark arts professor frowned as he watched Professor Dumbledore in the movie, who after checking the pot of potion, told Harry to force himself to drink the potion later. Of course he noticed something that other viewers had noticed before. In addition, he also noticed something that viewers like Sirius who knew part of the inside story did not notice. For example, Professor Dumbledore's strange hands appeared in the movie. It was obviously caused by Dumbledore wearing the Horcrux ring, not to mention why Dumbledore in the movie put on the Horcrux ring without any precautions. Dumbledore was already in a very bad state before, but he still took Harry non-stop to find the next soul ring. The weapon just looked like he was galloping towards his death. This reminded Professor Grindelwald of some not-so-wonderful past experiences during that time. Dumbledore's self-destructive tendencies were so obvious that he had to make a deal with Adam, the black-hearted kid, to let him destroy Dumbledore's plan. Professor Grindelwald watched with a cold face as Professor Dumbledore fell into pain and struggle on the screen. "Kill me. It's all my fault. No, don't, please." The words Professor Dumbledore uttered in a trance had no clear meaning to other viewers. They only felt the horror of those potions, but Professor Grindelwald knew the meaning behind them and thus deduced the effect of the potions. Suppresses the user's magic power and allows the user to see the most terrifying phantom. For Dumbledore, his greatest fear was probably the day Ariana died. For Dumbledore, he would probably rather the person who died that day was himself. Grindelwald turned his head and glanced aside. Professor Dumbledore was watching the movie expressionlessly, as if the person in the movie who was suffering great pain at this time had nothing to do with him. After finally feeding all the potion into Professor Dumbledore's mouth, Harry took out a locket located at the bottom of the basin. Then, while getting water for the thirsty Professor Dumbledore, Harry accidentally triggered the ghost in the lake. The Siege of Corpses, idiot. Seeing Dumbledore lying limply on the ground, and Harry having been dragged into the lake by the inferi, Professor Grindelwald couldn't help but gnash his teeth and curse under his breath. The protagonist definitely cannot die at this moment, and who else can save him except Dumbledore, who is now extremely weak. This was arranged by Voldemort. Harry cannot be blamed. Professor Dumbledore spoke now. Just like those potions just now can only be drunk by people. After drinking the potions, people will become thirsty, and the clear water there is useless. The only water that can be used is the lake next to it. A flash of orange light cut through the dim picture, followed by the second and third flashes. The flames that rushed into the lake swept away the inferi, who were afraid of light and heat. After Harry broke free from the inferi in the lake and escaped, he saw Professor Dumbledore, who was trying to support his body and release the Sea of Fire. Vulcan opens the way. At this moment, everyone felt the sense of security brought by Professor Dumbledore. "I didn't know you had learned this trick over the years." Seeing that the plot was starting to go in a good direction, Professor Grindelwald breathed a sigh of relief and joked to Professor Dumbledore beside him. However, the following plot made Professor Grindelwald a little overwhelmed. Professor Dumbledore and Harry had just returned to Hogwarts, and before they had time to catch their breath, the Death Eaters who entered Hogwarts with the help of Draco came to find them. It was too late. Professor Dumbledore asked Harry to put on the invisibility cloak and hide in home, a perfect spectator's perspective, perfect for witnessing the tragedy. Grindelwald remembered that Harry had watched Cedric being hit by the killing curse before, and then looked at the gloomy style of this scene, which was exactly the same as that time, and couldn't help but clench his fists. However, other viewers were not so sensitive. In their opinion, although Professor Dumbledore was very weak now, the scene of sweeping the corpses just now told them that even such a weak Professor Dumbledore was still very powerful. If Voldemort came in person, it would be fine, but now there are only a few small Death Eaters, not to be feared at this moment. The footsteps gradually approached, revealing the owner of the footsteps. Chapter 364. You are not alone. The owner of the footsteps walked from the shadows into the light, and it was Draco Malfoy, who had just opened the vanishing cabinet. Puff. The coke that Draco had just held in his mouth, that he had not swallowed due to nervousness, spurted out. Fortunately, he still had a cup in his hand to hold it, but it was a pity that he couldn't ask for the remaining coke in the cup. But he didn't regret the cup of coke for even a moment. Draco looked at himself in shock, having pulled out the wand in the movie. "No. Brother, you want to challenge Professor Dumbledore to a duel?" Then Draco saw himself in the movie knocking away Professor Dumbledore's wand with a disarming spell? Draco shook his hand, and the cup of coke fell directly to the ground. The remaining half cup of coke was scattered on the ground, But no one reacted because everyone was immersed in the same shock. However, despite disarming Professor Dumbledore, Draco was still unable to take action for a long time. During this period, the Death Eaters he called arrived, but because of Voldemort's instructions, Draco must kill Professor Dumbledore at this critical moment. Professor Snape arrived. Severus, please, Awada. Kindle. A death curse with a slight tremor at the end revealed the life of the greatest wizard of this century. The moment Professor Dumbledore's figure fell from the astronomy tower, the entire cinema was silent, except Professor Grindelwald turned around, grabbed Professor Dumbledore's shoulder and pulled him this way, and spoke in a low voice but with gritted teeth. This was your original plan. Others were still immersed in the confusion and shock of it. Professor Dumbledore really died like this, but he had already thought of the previous scene where Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape seemed to have no beginning or end dialogue. Professor Grindelwald knew that Professor Snape was Professor Dumbledore's man, so he made the relationship behind this scene clearer. Dumbledore's request in the movie was not asking Snape to let him go, but asking him to kill him. Professor Dumbledore blinked with sour eyes. He had to say that it was a bit shocking to see his own death with his own eyes meeting Grindelwald's eyes. Professor Dumbledore said softly, I had no choice at the time. How did I know that Adam still had such great strength? Professor Dumbledore did not deny it, because they were all people who knew more about the inside story, and the reason it's just a movie fiction didn't make sense to them. You put. Professor Grindelwald looked around, took a deep breath, and then cast silently before continuing, even if it's the situation in the movie, you have a better solution. No, I didn't, Professor Dumbledore responded directly to Professor Grindelwald's question. He shook his head. I'm just an old man who's dying and alone. If I don't sacrifice, am I going to let Harry, who still has an infinite future, sacrifice himself? Although his plan included Harry having to experience an infinitely close death crisis when he went to destroy Voldemort, there was still a high possibility of survival, and he also tried his best to create more opportunities for Harry to survive as Voldemort's Horcrux. If Harry wants to destroy Voldemort, he can only be killed directly by someone else or take a gamble that Voldemort can't really kill him. As for not destroying Voldemort, it's as if Harry took the initiative to destroy Voldemort in the first place, and it was Voldemort who wanted to kill him when he was still an infant. Looking at Professor Dumbledore, who looked calm, Professor Grindelwald was so angry that he wanted to curse, but he had no choice. This was his Dumbledore, who had already embarked on a completely different path than the guy in the castle who stuck with his significant other every day. You are not alone. In the end, that was all Professor Grindelwald could say. Yes, Professor Dumbledore responded softly. After everyone in the astronomy tower left, the camera finally turned to the lower level of the astronomy tower. Harry emerged from under the invisibility cloak, with grief and tears on his face. What's going on, Harry? Couldn't help but said while looking at the screen. It's probably because I was hit by a restraining spell before. Sirius was also shocked by the plot just now, but he was not as deeply immersed as Harry, so he could still think flexibly. Dumbledore can see through the invisibility cloak, and even if he doesn't have a wand, he can use a silent and wandless immobilizing spell on you. Maybe he's afraid that you won't be able to control your reaction, so Sirius did not continue speaking. On the one hand, the words had been spoken clearly enough, and on the other hand, his attention was attracted by the plot of the movie that followed. Looking at the body of Professor Dumbledore, the teachers and students who were attracted by the dark mark in the sky fell into great grief. In order to express their condolences, everyone pointed their wands with shimmering lights at the top to the sky. The little gleams of light briefly dispersed the dark clouds above everyone's heads, and the black mark in the sky slowly dissipated due to the lack of magic power to maintain it. Killing Professor Dumbledore has achieved his goal. The invading Death Eaters are not enough to clear out Hogwarts. At the same time, Voldemort does not want to kill everyone in Hogwarts. Now the camera panned over the faces of a famous professor and students. Almost everyone had tears on their faces, with either sad or angry expressions. Perhaps the wizards were too absorbed in the scene, and the audience in the theater also raised their wands, wiped their tears silently, and even cried out loud when they saw this scene. Oh, Professor Dumbledore, he didn't even have time to drink a sip of water. Ron wiped his tears and raised his wand, and blew his nose at the end. The atmosphere around was so heavy that Professor Grindelwald and Professor Dumbledore, the only two who did not raise their wands, felt for a moment that they were a bit out of place. Professor Dumbledore couldn't help but look around, and found that Professor McGonagall beside him also raised her wand. and her face was full of grief and her eyes were wet, almost the same as Professor McGonagall in the movie. Ahem, Minerva, Professor. Dumbledore couldn't help but whisper a reminder, and at the same time touched Professor McGonagall with his elbow. It's okay for you to raise your wand, but what's wrong with this expression, I'm still alive, Oh. Albus, cough. Professor McGonagall, who was immersed in the plot of the movie, came back to her senses, couldn't help blushing, and quickly retracted her hand holding the wand to wipe the wet corners of her eyes. You can't blame me for this, it's just that this movie is too realistic. It feels like I'm really attending your funeral, Professor. Dumbledore's eyes twitched. Should I bow to you in return? Amid the fury-like cry of Fawkes, everyone's mourning for Professor Dumbledore came to an end. The departure of Professor Dumbledore is indeed sad, but the enemy has not been eliminated yet, and the situation does not allow them to be immersed in sadness for too long. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365. Bitter fruit becomes sweet if you watch others eat it. After the premiere of the new movie, its shocking content swept the entire wizarding world in just a few days. Its popularity can be called hot. No, it should be said to be a big hit, although the description of words alone is a little pale compared to watching the movie itself. Newspapers and magazines still rushed to report it, and several important plots in it were also known to everyone, especially the most important one. The death of Professor Dumbledore. The social death that Harry and Ron worried about before did not happen. Due to the length of the article, within a few days after the premiere of the movie, even the most marginal magazines had no spare pages to report their social death. From newspapers to magazines, from interviews to radio, if you don't discuss the death of Professor Dumbledore, even your peers will laugh at you for not catching the trend. This wave of enthusiasm was so huge that some wizards who really lived in isolation couldn't help but think that Dumbledore was really dead when they saw the newspaper for the first time after sending off another old friend who came to mourn him. Professor Dumbledore decided to talk to Adam about this matter with a dark face. If this goes on, even if he is still alive, he is already dead in everyone's heart. If Professor Dumbledore's death is the well-deserved first on the popularity list, then the second on the popularity list is somewhat controversial. As Adam began to make efforts in all aspects, the discussion about Professor Dumbledore's death gradually decreased. In this process, the hottest topics in the discussion that gradually emerged were, 1 is Professor Snape, who killed Professor Dumbledore in the movie. Some wizards who were too involved in watching the movie even sent some not-so-decent things to Professor Snape. It can only be said that fortunately, things sent to Hogwarts now have to go through security checks first. However, the above situation only lasted for a few days. As these fans who made extreme behaviors were tried according to law, each of them received a one-stop service of detention, fines and apologies. Many people denounced this behavior in interviews as not being able to distinguish between movies and reality. Professor Dumbledore and Professor Snape are both working in Hogwarts now, and they are colleagues now. How can Professor Dumbledore deal with these fans' behavior? The above words have indeed awakened many people. Of course, there is no shortage of crazy people in every world. For this situation, the Ministry of Magic also has a relatively sound set of laws to educate and reform. In addition to Professor Snape, another topic that can compete for the second most popular is URAB, who left a letter in the fake Horcrux, was at the end of the movie. When Professor Dumbledore was tortured so hard, the Horcrux he found was fake, and almost everyone was stunned on the spot. Everyone had not completely gotten rid of the sadness of Professor Dumbledore's death, and they were hit so hard even Professor Dumbledore did not expect that when he talked about this Horcrux, his attention was all on the Resurrection Stone ring, and he did not ask Adam how he got those Horcruxes. That RAB went through all the pain that Professor Dumbledore suffered in the movie and replaced the Horcrux. This was a very heroic thing, but it ended up with such a mistake. Thinking of the series of processes that needed to be experienced to obtain the Horcrux, everyone admired RAB and couldn't help but curse the damn fate. Sitting in the private room of the Nightingale bar, Regulus looked at the newspapers in silence. What do you think of seeing everyone's evaluation of your feat? Adam smiled and served him a glass of pure blood glory, Regulus's homemade cocktail. It's really fate. The thousands of words in Regulus's heart finally turned into just this one sentence. Adam deeply agreed with this. 2 weeks passed quickly with various discussions. Adam, who was immersed in study and research and occasionally gathered with his brothers, finally waited for what he had been looking forward to. After 6 parts of preparation, it is finally time to harvest the fruits. Although the fruits are bitter and hard to swallow, they are very sweet when others eat them. Do you think the death of Cedric and Professor Dumbledore is the end? No, it's just the beginning. Adam stood in the screening room, watching the screening rooms below gradually filled up with people, and couldn't help but smile, especially when he saw some familiar people. His smile became more and more brilliant uncontrollably after the previous wave of super high popularity of Professor Dumbledore's death. The tickets for this premiere are even more popular, but it is obvious that the main characters of the movie are more complete than before. The reason was very simple. Adam personally decided to send these tickets, which were accurate to the seats for each person, and could be used for this and the next 2 movies, ensuring that every knife would not fall in vain and would be firmly stuck where they should be. Up. Hi, Hermione, long time no see. In the screening room, Harry looked at Ron on the left, then looked at Hermione on the right, and finally broke the silence first. Long time no see. Hermione smiled and nodded at Harry, then looked at Ron. Although her smile was not as bright, she still nodded and greeted him. Ron also nodded silently in response. Seeing that the 2 of them were still maintaining their dignity, Harry finally breathed a sigh of relief. Actually, Harry thought too much this time. Ron and Hermione's breakup was just because they found that their views on life were not compatible. It was a peaceful breakup, not because of someone's cheating, but it was normal. No one else knew the details of Hermione and Ron's breakup, except for Adam, who cheated with his mind power, who knew why they broke up. As more and more people came, Harry's side became more and more lively. In addition to the 3 of them, the Weasley family, members of the Order of the Phoenix, former classmates, professors of Hogwarts, the first few rows were almost all their acquaintances. Harry stood up and looked back in surprise. Sure enough, the back was basically all familiar faces. He even saw the Malfoy family sitting in the left row. Wait, that's Professor Snape. Harry couldn't help but exclaimed and wanted to slap himself the next second. I told you to talk too much. Ever since the clip about him seeing Professor Snape's past in the previous movie was released, he has been worried about this matter, fearing that one day he would run into Professor Snape and give him an avatar with a gloomy face when he went out. It was not until the days passed and Professor Snape never came to his door that he was relieved, and that's why he relaxed his vigilance. Now it's good. Professor Snape didn't notice him, but he took the initiative to greet Professor Snape. He could imagine what Professor Snape would do next. Exclamation mark. Harry saw Professor Snape turned his head and smiled and nodded at him after he called him, and his face turned pale with fear. Bad, Professor Snape was mad at him? Exclamation mark. Chapter 366. From then on, Harry bid farewell to his childhood and innocence. After Hermione's explanation, Harry finally accepted the fact that Professor Snape had changed his gender. The situation did not allow him to stay in shock for too long, because the movie was about to start. After the routine advertisement, the logo of Dream Cinema appeared, representing the official start of the movie. Everyone looked at the screen with smiles and expectations at first, but the smiles on everyone's faces disappeared more than a minute into the movie. The movie started with a speech by Scrimgeour, and the beginning showed how serious the situation in the wizarding world is now. Everyone couldn't help but think of the ending of the previous movie. Yes, without Professor Dumbledore, Professor Gandalf was nowhere to be seen in the movie, so who could everyone rely on? No one could be relied on. It seemed that there was still a Ministry of Magic, but everyone present knew that the Ministry of Magic during Scrimgeour's time was only slightly more reliable than that during Fudge's time, and it was still unreliable. In essence, the reason is simple. The Ministry of Magic simply cannot produce the power to fight against Voldemort. It may be okay to deal with scattered Death Eaters and Dark Wizards, but it will be defeated if it encounters Voldemort in the wizarding world. In the movie, there is no one who can make Voldemort afraid, and the following plot is even more moving. Harry and the Dursley family parted ways. This Muggle family, which had been despised by countless people before, rarely showed warmth at this moment. Hermione's obliviate made many people cover their mouths. A spell that was lightly written, but it was better than 1,000 words, showing the most tragic possibility. Obliviate should not be able to make the people in the photo disappear. Harry couldn't help looking at Hermione. Shut up. That's a movie expression. Photos symbolize past memories. Hermione's state of sadness and almost crying was broken by Harry. Then Hermione realized that Harry did this to achieve this goal, and looked at him and pursed her lips before Hermione could say anything. The camera turned and followed Professor Snape into Malfoy Manor, where everyone was able to personally witness Voldemort's meeting. It must be said that Voldemort's deterrence was indeed strong. After everyone had gradually begun to immerse themselves in the atmosphere created by the movie, seeing this, some wizards present could not help but sit up straight and touch their wands, and when Nagini opened her mouth and rushed towards the camera in a close-up, many people let out a short exclamation, "Oh, MRS." Molly was one of them, and Arthur Weasley immediately whispered a few words to comfort her. "It's okay, Mom, we are all here." Fred sat in the back row behind Mrs. Molly and pinched Mrs. Molly's shoulder with his hand while speaking. Great. Adam couldn't help but applaud when he saw this scene, and he looked forward to the future more and more. It's a pity that the real bloodshed still has to wait until the next big battle soon. The story of the 7 Potters came to the Weasley family. The Weasley family didn't expect that Bill would have a role, and Bill was injured by a werewolf. Will this happen? Being injured by a werewolf but not turning into a werewolf, Bill couldn't help but look at his family members around him. Well, because of the current miserable state of the goblins, Bill was forced to lose his original job as a curse breaker at Gringotts. Luckily, he was very capable and had rich work experience. He originally wanted to find another job, but Fred and George got the news from Adam and asked him to wait. At present, Bill has returned to the original Gringotts, which is now the Wizard Bank, to continue to be a curse breaker. Well, maybe the wound is not deep and the treatment is timely. Yeah, you just got scratched by a claw in the movie. Fred and George looked at each other and analyzed whether they guessed it right or not. It should still be possible. Fred and George felt that even if this story was fictional, the knowledge involved should always be true. Otherwise Adam would not have needed to use reality as the background to shoot this movie. The two did not consider the possibility that Adam spent so much effort just to feed them a knife. After all, this is really illogical, and even if one's thinking is more out of the ordinary, one can't think of such a strange direction. Then Lupin and Tonks revealed their love affair, which shocked everyone in the Order of the Phoenix. They turned their heads and looked at the two people sitting together. Are you together? Looking at the two people holding hands subconsciously, everyone knew the answer, but why did we know about this later than the movie? The young couple, who had not thought about telling everyone so early, could not help but ask this question while dealing with the questions and jokes of their friends. Why did Adam know about it when they hadn't told anyone yet? I really didn't know before today. Adam scratched his head and finally decided to deal with the matter in silence, hiding his merits and fame. The movie was still playing, and Harry strongly opposed everyone using the Polyjuice potion to become himself. After all, this was life-threatening, but it was obvious that his opposition was ineffective in the face of everyone's insistence. Ouch! Watching Harry in the movie suddenly have a bunch of hair pulled out by Hermione, the real Harry shuddered with empathy, and then couldn't help but look at Hermione beside him. Even without the last life and death experience, the trio had developed enough tacit understanding in the Forbidden Forest. Hermione knew what Harry was thinking as soon as he moved, and couldn't help rolling her eyes at him. Although Hermione didn't say a word, he always felt that she was cursing very dirty. Harry shrank his neck and continued to look at the screen. However, Harry regretted it at this glance. He would rather see Hermione's dirty expression than watch 7 of himself changing clothes in the movie. Puffcough. Ron patted Harry's shoulder. It's okay. It's all a small matter. Of course it's a small matter for you. I was the one who took off my clothes in the movie. Harry's heart was shouting silently. Hey, Ginny, is this really the case? When Harry takes off his clothes, Fred couldn't help but tease his sister, but was hit in the heart and fell into George's arms. After hearing this, Harry felt that he was about to turn into the color of a ghost. Fortunately, although the movies made by Adam are no longer marked as children's movies, they are not so crazy as to make the clip of Harry changing his pants look eye-catching. So Harry's shaky chastity is finally preserved as the 7 Harrys, some riding flying motorcycles, some riding brooms, and some riding thestrals, rushed into the sky with their escorts. Everyone couldn't help but stop playing and looked at the screen nervously. As expected by everyone, and not as expected by everyone in the movie, a group of Death Eaters rushed out of the dark clouds. As soon as they rose into the sky, everyone dispersed directly, and the Death Eaters had to track them separately. The camera followed Hagrid and escorted Harry to let everyone know that this was the real Harry in the tense and exciting battle. A green light flashed, and everyone's heart was lifted up. They were relieved when they saw that Harry was safe. However, one person did not breathe a sigh of relief. Harry saw the white shadow falling after the green light. Hedwig. Chapter 367 Ion number 039, M like a saint, Fred Harry admitted he was prepared to see someone familiar die again in the film after all. Forget about Cedric. Starting from the death of Professor Dumbledore in the last movie, this series of movies can be said to have stopped pretending. There will be no surprises in the following battles and sacrifices, but Harry didn't expect that Hedwig would leave him in this movie, and she would be the first to leave him in this movie. Ling Dongtisk, who is disturbing me now? Adam frowned and took out a piece of parchment from his pocket. Seeing the Deathly Hallows symbol on the top of the parchment, Adam's frown relaxed. This is the work group that Adam established for the Wiccan Party. As early as when Adam was still studying at Hogwarts, he and Grindelwald made a deal. After this transaction, Grindelwald handed over the Wiccan Party to Adam's subordinates. After taking over, Adam took the Wiccan Party out to do work such as establishing and acquiring companies, and at the same time developed its power. In the past few years, the Wiccan Party has weakened a lot without Grindelwald's management. Send a message now. It should be that there is progress in the mission. After checking the content of the message, Adam recognized the workability and efficiency of the Wiccan Party. They were indeed the elite who followed Grindelwald to fight against the European and American Ministry of Magic. It's a pity that this situation is like this. Adam glanced at the screening room below. He really couldn't leave, so Adam took out his shorthand quill and began to reply to the message. He first praised their achievements, and then asked them to maintain normal operations and integrate into the local market. Waiting for his orders. After replying, Adam couldn't wait to continue looking at the screening room. In this moment, the last phase of the chase between Harry and the others in the air had passed, and several waves of people arrived at the rebuilt burrow one after another. Oh, fortunately, I didn't miss the whole listening, although Dongting is actually a localized homophonic mem after translation. The original homophonic mem is actually, I'm like a saint, Fred, faced. With Fred's concern, George in the movie smiled with some difficulty, then raised his finger to point to where the ears were missing. I am holy. Holy. The joke was so Fred and George that the immersion of the two and even the real eyes was almost completely drained. In contrast, George himself was the quickest to adjust his mentality. Looking at Fred, whose eyes were a little moist, he smiled and said, looking at the bright side, this way we won't be confused again. What do you say I go get my ears pierced? As he spoke, George touched his earlobe. Then it really becomes a hole. George, if you dare to get your ears pierced, I'll make another hole in your body. MRS. Molly said while wiping her eyes. No. Mom, you made the mistake. I'm Fred. George shrank his neck after hearing this. Then he felt Fred bump his shoulder and whispered to him, look, it's better not to have such obvious features. Although Harry in the front row was also sad that George lost his ear, it was obvious that Moody's subordinates touched him more. How long has it been since the movie started? Judging from the intact ice cubes in the Coke on hand, it shouldn't have been long. But why does it feel like a long time has passed? Hedwig and Moody have already left. Who else will leave next? Harry looked at himself in the movie who was about to leave everyone alone, and once again felt that the movie and reality overlapped, because he now had the same thought: no one should die for him anymore. However, both he in the movie and him in reality were convinced by Ron's next words when he heard both of us will die in 2 days without her. Harry was silent. But he couldn't help but agree in his heart. One time without Hermione present, they really almost died in the 5th area when they were spending the night on a mission in the Forbidden Forest. Fortunately, the house elf arrived in time. It was then that he deeply realized that the important points that Hermione usually talked about were really important. The plot after that was finally a little more relaxed. Bill and Fleur held a wedding. In addition, there was a small episode. Scrimgeour came to read Professor Dumbledore's will and handed over his belongings to Harry in accordance with a will. Benefit the three of them. Ron got the Deluminator, Hermione got the Tales of Beetle the Bard, and Harry got a golden snitch, the one he caught in his first Quidditch match. The audience thought that these relics might have hidden meanings, hiding secret weapons or key information left by Professor Dumbledore. Apparently Scrimgeour thought so too. The most suspicious one was the golden snitch, but after Harry got the golden snitch, there was no change in the golden snitch. Scrimgeour was visibly disappointed. What? Do you think it could be in there, Professor? Grindelwald looked at Professor Dumbledore beside him and asked, why? Does it have to be so profound, Professor? Dumbledore spread his hands. Can't it just be a simple wish left by an old man to his promising descendants, just like what is written in my will, ha, Professor? Grindelwald smiled and nodded. It was obvious that he didn't believe Professor Dumbledore's lies due to the arrival of the Death Eaters. Bill's wedding was ruined. Harry and his two friends, as the main targets of the Death Eaters, apparated and fled the scene after some twists and turns. Harry and his friends hid in the Black Mansion for one night. The next morning, Harry came to Sirius's room sadly to miss him, but unexpectedly found that the initials of Sirius's brother, Regulus Black, were RAB. Sirius was stunned when he saw this. He never knew about this. Is this true? Facing Lupin's question, Sirius opened his mouth and didn't know how to answer. In fact, his impression of this brother had long been very faint. He didn't even remember that the initials of his name were RAB. Seeing that Harry actually asked Creature about the locket, Sirius even had the urge to summon Creature to ask. Fortunately, he suppressed this urge, but he would definitely ask him after returning. After some effort, they found Mundungus Fletcher and learned that the locket was in Umbridge's hands. So they had to risk entering the Ministry of Magic to steal the locket. The excitement and laughter made the audience hold their breath and laugh. Pa, Fred, and George couldn't help but high-five when they saw the props Harry used to attract everyone's attention. There is no doubt that this style is a product of Wheel-Eye's Wizard Wheezes. I have a good idea, Fred. Me too, George. Chapter 368. So why not break off a branch? No matter what prank ideas Fred and George were muttering about later, Ron couldn't help but sigh as he watched the rest of the movie. This Hermione is too Hermione. The clothes I used to change before, the books I came across while picking up the clothes, and the white essence that I used to treat my split body in the movie. There's even a tent inside. Is this the daily urgent need that Hermione mentioned before? As soon as he finished speaking, Ron felt a solid gaze falling on him, which made his body stiffen. Damn it, they forgot that Hermione was by their side this time. Fortunately, Hermione only glanced at him, and Ron quickly shut up and warned himself not to forget it again. After destroying the locket to no avail, Harry once again sensed the situation on Voldemort's side. This time Voldemort seemed to be questioning a wizard about something, and then, a man stole the wand. Many viewers couldn't understand this paragraph. After all, Harry had received intermittent information from Voldemort before, except for the time when Voldemort took the initiative to let him know, but the people who couldn't understand it definitely didn't include someone who appeared as a young man in the movie. At this time Professor Grindelwald frowned and realized that things were not simple. He knew very well what Voldemort was looking for, which was the Elder Wand that had been stolen by him. But from this point of view, it seems that he may appear later and be visited by Voldemort. Someone mentioned Aunt Bathilda at Bill's wedding before, and said that Harry didn't know Dumbledore. Harry and the others might ask her later. He should still be in Nuremberg in the movie, and Aunt Bathilda. I know. Thinking of this, Professor Grindelwald suddenly remembered a book about Dumbledore written by the unscrupulous editor called The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, mentioned in the movie, and said it was from Basil. Could it be that what Grandmother told her was also about herself? What Aunt Bathilda knows about Dumbledore's life is related to her? Professor Grindelwald's expression was a little subtle. Frankly speaking, if the past of Dumbledore and himself is exposed without any end, it can indeed be said that Dumbledore lied. For example, the process of Dumbledore defeating him was actually a play by them. So will this movie reference that past? Grindelwald was not offended that his past with Dumbledore would be made public, and even looked forward to it. The plot that follows has entered a long and depressing stage, with the threats of Voldemort and Death Eaters, the lack of any clues about the search for Horcruxes, and the evil magic of the Horcruxes themselves that can affect people's emotions. Ron of the trio leaves the team, and the argument that broke out before the separation. Ron's unscrupulous remarks made Ron in real life feel a little embarrassed when he saw this, and didn't know whether he should look at Harry next to him. It seems that Harry doesn't seem to pay too much attention to these minutiae now. Harry and Hermione traveled to the place where he was born, where Godric Gryffindor was born, and where Professor Dumbledore's previous home was. They thought there might be secrets about the Horcruxes there. Oh my God, why didn't I think of going there to see? Harry couldn't help but murmur while looking at the screen. Next they met an old woman. Harry was talking to herself and followed the old woman. He was talking to himself all the way, but the old woman didn't say a word, which made the audience a little confused. Then the old woman performed a great transformation and turned into Nagini, the big snake next to Voldemort. This also explained why she didn't say a word to Harry but seemed to be communicating with her. Harry and Hermione managed to escape, but Harry's wand was destroyed in the process. Hermione took Harry to another rarely visited place, a forest covered with snow. Hermione couldn't help but said, "How on earth did Adam know this?" In the movie, no one except her and her parents knew she had been to the places she took other people to Opera to. Believe me, we are tired of asking this question here. Harry couldn't help but murmur. The atmosphere in the movie was so depressing that he desperately needed to say something to distract himself at this moment. On the screen, Harry, who had lost his wand, borrowed Hermione's wand and kept vigil wrapped in a blanket, staring into the depths of the woods in silence. Maybe he is thinking about what to do next. Maybe he is thinking about the whereabouts of other Horcruxes. Maybe he is thinking about life. Seeing now, Harry felt that his sense of empathy might not be as deep as before, because he had not experienced such a depressing and desperate situation in the darkness. A doe Patronus appeared. After Harry found it and chased after it, the Patronus also ran away. Harry chased the Patronus all the way, and finally stopped on a frozen river. Looking at the Patronus disappearing, Harry swallowed, squatted down and brushed off the snow on the river. On the ice surface exposed under the snow, you can vaguely see the shape of a sword underneath. Merlin, is that the sword in the lake? Ron spoke in a daze. There is no way around it. Merlin's story is one of those rare stories that is very famous in both the Wizarding and Muggle worlds, and is even more famous than the stories in the tales of Beedle the Bard. Hearing this, Harry was also stunned and said uncertainly, "So was that the fairy of the lake? Or Merlin?" Hermione was shocked when she heard the exchange between the two people next to her. "What are you talking about? This is obviously the sword of Gryffindor. Harry, you pulled it out." "Oh, that's the movie. So haven't you seen the second part of the Chamber of Secrets?" Harry and Ron were even more shocked. "How is it obvious? How did you see it? The ice on the river in the movie was very real. Under the slightly distorted refraction effect, you could only vaguely see the shadow of a sword under the ice." How did Hermione recognize that it was the sword of Gryffindor, and the sword didn't appear for too long at that time? The premiere of the second part was a few months ago. How could Hermione remember it so clearly? Okay, this is very Hermione. The two of them found that it was quite reasonable in the end, so they swallowed their complaints and focused on the screen. After Harry found that the flying spell was useless, he used a spell to open the ice, and then took off his clothes and planned to jump in to get the sword. Why don't you break a branch and deform it? Or use other methods, maybe? The conversation just now opened the conversation box. Hermione couldn't help complaining when she saw this. Harry opened his mouth, and a light bulb suddenly lit up, and his eyes fell on his chest. In the movie, it must be because of the interference of the Horcrux. Yes, that's it. It must not be because I'm stupid. Hermione nodded. This reason made sense. Just when Harry was about to touch the sword at the bottom of the river, the Horcrux Harry was wearing seemed to sense the danger and dragged Harry to the top, but there was still some distance from the hole where Harry came down, and Harry was dragged and almost drowned in the cold river. It's because of the interference of the Horcrux. This time Harry learned to take the initiative, pointing to the screen and affirming, "Otherwise I would definitely take off the Horcrux first and then fish it out." Hermione turned her head and blinked. "So why not break a branch, Harry?" Chapter 369 Deathly Hallows. The joking atmosphere somewhat eluded the urgency of life and death in the movie. Then the sword was picked up by a hand, and Harry was also rescued. "Hermione, I said we would die without you." Halfway through Harry's words, the camera became clear. Ron was standing not far from Harry in the movie, holding Gryffindor's sword in his hand. Silence. Is Cambridge tonight? The background in the movie is still freezing cold, and the way Ron's hair sticks to his face because it's soaked makes him feel cold, and his heart even colder. "I think so too." In the awkward silence, Ron's voice sounded faintly. "By the way, it was me in the movie who said we couldn't survive 2 days without Hermione." The awkward atmosphere lasted until the threesome in the movie reconciled, and then it eased a little. "Dumbledore knew I would leave?" "No, he knew you would want to come back." I have to say that this kind of conversation was too much for Ron and Harry. Harry couldn't help but think that although he had never felt the uneasiness and depression of being hunted all the time, he was still very familiar with this mode of getting along. At the back of the screening room, Professor Grindelwald automatically filtered the love and affection of these young people, and his focus was more on Dumbledore. For example, Dumbledore has obviously made these preparations in advance. For example, after discovering that Voldemort was looking for the Elder Wand, he thought of the scene where Dumbledore was disarmed by Malfoy, such as, "Wow, Professor." Grindelwald couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he saw that the love letter Dumbledore wrote to him even appeared in the movie. How should I put it? I don't know if the book in this movie will be published. In reality, he can provide the material. This can indeed be possible. Adam saw Professor Grindelwald's idea, and after thinking about it, he felt that there was no problem, as long as the person involved agreed. Of course, it's okay to disagree, but it can't be sold in fantasy cinema. The trio found the Lovergate family in order to investigate the symbol that appeared frequently during their investigation. Because at Bill's wedding, Luna's father, Xenophilius Lovigad, wore a pendant with its symbol. Xenophilius Lovigad explained to them that it was the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, which came from a well-known fairy tale in the wizarding world. In order to take care of Harry, who had never heard this story, Hermione retold this story. Although almost everyone present has heard this story, the movie has made this fairy tale into an animation form, and it is not boring at all to watch it again after the story was told. Harry, who was sitting in the cinema, looked around. Everyone seemed to have heard this story, so it was indeed added specifically to take care of him. Don't think too much. There are many Muggle-born wizards who have never heard of it. Hermione looked at Harry and comforted him. So, you don't know either. Harry felt some comfort in his heart. No, I know. Hermione blinked and said a little embarrassedly, because the accompanying commemorative card for this movie is called Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, I went to look up information about the Deathly Hallows, including the symbol and the fairy tale. You even have to do previews for watching movies. Ron looked at the monster with an expression on his face, and it felt like he was suddenly back in school. So, you knew what that sign meant before. Harry was focused on something else. That's right, but you look so fascinated just now. What does knowing that sign have to do with any being fascinated by the movie? Hermione looked at them with a strange expression. Aren't you fascinated when you watch the first few movies? Harry had nothing to say, except that if he had known the meaning of that symbol, he would have explained it to everyone at that time. That's called showing off. Hermione saw Harry's wandering eyes and knew what he was thinking. I don't. Harry could only deny it after learning the meaning of the symbols from Xenophilius Lovigad. The three of them planned to leave, but unexpectedly Xenophilius Lovigad stopped them because Luna and Harry were very close. The Death Eaters captured Luna in order to catch Harry. In this regard, Hermione also deliberately asked them to appear in front of the Death Eaters before apparating away, letting the Death Eaters know that Xenophilius Lovigad did not give them false information, in order to save love. The good she had cast oblivion on her parents just to avoid bringing down her family. She could understand what Xenophilius Lovigad did. However, the three of them were eventually captured by the search team. Hermione had an idea and cast a transformation spell on Harry's face. The facial features were so unrecognizable that it was difficult to determine whether he was Harry. If he doesn't match the wanted order, he won't be able to take Harry to the Ministry of Magic as a wanted criminal in a fair and just way. But fortunately, the search team is not a rigid person. They can't take Harry to the Ministry of Magic and hand him over to the Death Eaters. It's the same thing. Anyway, it's the same group of people who give the money, and they just want the money. The three were taken to Malfoy Manor. The good news was that Voldemort was not there. The bad news was that Voldemort was in Nuremberg now, asking about the whereabouts of Grindelwald's Elder Wand. Was I so embarrassed at the time, seeing himself sitting in the corner of the cell in the movie, with sunken eyes and skinny bones. Grindelwald couldn't help but frown. Perhaps you had already received the news of my death by that time, Professor. Dumbledore rarely spoke. Although Grindelwald was imprisoned in Nuremberg, the person who really imprisoned him was himself. Professor Dumbledore had no doubt that Grindelwald could learn news from the outside world in prison. Even if Grindelwald is not interested in other news, if there is news of his death, he will definitely receive it. Kill me, Voldemort, I will die gladly. Looking at Grindelwald, who was laughing mercilessly at Voldemort on the screen, Professor Dumbledore seemed to have another face slowly overlapping with it, the same happy and wild expression, but a face in my memory is much more charming than the one in the movie at the moment. Sneeze. Professor Grindelwald suddenly sneezed, then frowned and glanced suspiciously at Professor Dumbledore next to him. However, Professor Dumbledore was looking at the screen seriously at this time, looking very fascinated. Without getting the news of the Elder Wand, Voldemort simply killed Grindelwald. Since then, the two myths of the wizarding world in the last century ended their love-hate life in the tower. There was also a slight problem with the Death Eaters at Malfoy Manor. Bellatrix was originally very happy to see the three people captured, until she saw Gryffinder's sword that was brought along with the search team. It was Voldemort who told her to keep it in his vault, but now it's in the hands of these people. Didn't she neglect her duty? Exclamation mark. It was a small matter that her vault was stolen, but it was a big deal that she betrayed Voldemort's trust in her. You must know that there was another thing in her vault that Voldemort told her to keep. The great fear made Bellatrix violently drive away the search team, and ask Narcissa to lock Ron and the boy who seemed to be Harry in the dungeon, and interrogate Hermione alone. Hermione's wails under the Cruciatus curse were horrifying. Chapter 370 Who is the undercover? When they walked out of the theater, the audience couldn't help but feel a little sad at the end of the movie. Harry and others escape from Malfoy Manor with the help of Dobby, but Dobby is also killed by Bellatrix's dagger. Everyone had a lot of dissatisfaction with this house elf before, but now that they saw that the house elf died to protect Harry, even if they were still dissatisfied with Dobby's betrayal, it was hard to express their dissatisfaction. In addition, although Grindelwald did not tell Voldemort the truth, Voldemort still guessed that the Elder Wand was Professor Dumbledore's wand. After all, after the Elder Wand was defeated, it would follow the person who defeated the original owner, and as we all know, Dumbledore was the one who defeated Grindelwald. So at the end of the movie, Voldemort dug up Professor Dumbledore's tomb and obtained the Elder Wand. The plot seems to have come to an end, but it has also laid a lot of foreshadowing for the next movie. Hermione couldn't help but sigh. No wonder the commemorative card of this movie has one at the end. Part 1. This movie and the next one. The connections between the films are indeed deeper than those between the previous films, since this time there was no undoubted shocking focus like the previous death of Professor Dumbledore. Discussions in various newspapers, magazines and other media over the next 2 weeks were full of discussion thanks to the promotion of fantasy cinema. Everyone already knows that the next The Boy Who Lived VIE will be the last one in this series. Naturally, all the previous foreshadowings and mysteries will be answered. Therefore, the main serious media focus on plot analysis, looking for unanswered questions in current movies. The first is to eliminate Voldemort's prerequisite, the Horcruxes. In the previous 7 movies, the protagonist destroyed a total of 3 Horcruxes. According to the movie, Voldemort is very likely to divide the soul into 7 parts. Then in addition to his body, there are still 3 Horcruxes to destroy. Is it really too late? Question mark. You must know that this is the only movie left in this series. Many media have expressed some concerns about this, feeling that the next movie will not be enough to destroy the Horcruxes, but soon a talk show invited a critic who had recently studied The Boy Who Lived series to say, the reason for the slow progress in eliminating Horcruxes was that the protagonist had not yet determined the existence and quantity of Horcruxes and had no clues, but now it is different. There was clearly something wrong with Bellatrix's panic about the vault being stolen. Having watched the movie 3 times, he swore with his grandma's dentures that he saw Hermione's hand grabbing Bellatrix. Sees her. Obviously, the protagonists will use the old method again, Polyjuice Potion, to enter Bellatrix's vault and find other Horcruxes or clues to other Horcruxes. This argument attracted many wizards who had watched the movie to go to the cinema to watch it again, and then they all agreed with the critics' words. As a result, the popularity of this talk show suddenly increased by several points. In addition to this talk show, there are also other media that have dug up some valid information. As a well-known old newspaper, the Daily Prophet invited Mr. Ollivander for an interview with great dignity, and the discussion was none other than the mysterious foreshadowing of the Elder Wand in the movie. Voldemort seems to be more powerful after getting the Elder Wand, but he will be defeated at the hands of Harry Potter. Mr. Ollivander looked very determined in the photo. In the report, he told reporters, "I don't know if the audience has ever noticed that detail in the 6th film. Draco Malfoy shot down Dumbledore's Elder Wand with a disarming spell. According to the characteristics of the Elder Wand, its owner was killed at this moment. Became Draco Malfoy, and after that, in the 7th film that just came out, Harry Potter snatched Draco Malfoy's wand from his hands. Even if it was not the Elder Wand, there was no doubt that Harry Potter defeated Draco Malfoy at this moment, and the ownership of the Elder Wand changed hands again, almost. All the wizards who saw this suddenly felt goosebumps all over their bodies, and they quickly continued reading. If Voldemort takes the Elder Wand, which is owned by Harry Potter, and fights Harry Potter, he will definitely end in failure. I am willing to use my lifetime experience in making wands to guarantee that. Oh my God, is this part of Professor Dumbledore's plan? Ron couldn't help but marvel as he looked at the newspaper. Were they really watching the same movie? Why could these people see so many hidden things but he couldn't? That's not all. There are still many questions that remain mysteries. This is probably the key to our ability to defeat Voldemort at the end of the movie. Harry was also flipping through a newspaper, but it was from another publisher. Although these media have said a lot of foreshadowing that is beneficial to him in the movie, from his point of view, these alone are still not enough for him to defeat Voldemort in the movie. Now Harry's no longer the child who naively thought that he could defeat Voldemort if he acted recklessly. When his vision has improved, what he said in the past is simply black history. Any more questions? Ron couldn't help but look at Harry in confusion. Certainly, Harry put the newspaper in his hand on the desk and looked at Ron. If nothing else, the most important question is who brought us Gryffindor's sword? You must know that it was kept in the vault by Bellatrix. Looking at her excitement, this matter is obviously confidential, and only people Voldemort trusts know about it. Ron also came to his senses at this time, but this person stole the sword and brought it to us. He knew our whereabouts. But why didn't he show up at the time? Who is he? As a subordinate trusted by Voldemort, he knew their whereabouts, but betrayed Voldemort by bringing the sword to them to destroy the Horcruxes, but he didn't show up in front of them, only using the Patronus to lead them. This person's behavior is full of contradictions. If he is on the side of justice, why doesn't he show up in front of them? If he is on Voldemort's side, why did he bring Gryffindor's sword to them? Faced with Ron's question, Harry had no choice but to remain silent, because he was also thinking about the answer to this question after some association. He actually had a guess, that is, Professor Snape. Although the other party betrayed Professor Dumbledore, the other party was also a member of the Order of the Phoenix. And Professor Dumbledore once trusted him very much. Judging from the various four-sided arrangements that Professor Dumbledore has shown so far, Professor Dumbledore's vision is still very accurate. So it is not impossible that Professor Snape's true identity is actually an undercover agent of the Order of the Phoenix and the Death Eaters. But the problem is that if Professor Snape is really an undercover agent, wouldn't it be better if he cooperated with Professor Dumbledore to kill those Death Eaters directly that day? What undercover mission is it that you have to complete? Even if you kill Professor Dumbledore, you will know from watching the movie that when Professor Dumbledore died, the Justice side almost collapsed and was beaten by Voldemort and the Death Eaters without any ability to fight back. Based on this analysis, Harry doubted his guess again. Professor Dumbledore's vision is not necessarily 100% correct. Wasn't Peter Pettigrew also a member of the Order of the Phoenix back then? Chapter 371 Greed and cunning are the nature of goblins. In addition, there is another key factor, the patron saint who appears in the movie. When the patron saint appeared, Harry heard the exclamation from behind. After the movie, he accidentally learned from the exchanges between Order members that the doll was his mother's patron saint. You must know that the patron saint has a unique symbolic meaning in the wizarding world. It is almost impossible to see the same patron saint in two unrelated people at the same time. For example, his patron saint is a stag, and another person who has the same patron saint as him is his father, and that person's patron saint is the same stag as his mother. So, the person who infiltrated the Death Eaters and even gained Voldemort's trust is related to his mother. It was this that made Harry completely give up his doubts about Professor Snape. He felt that a Death Eater who is related to his mother but had been hiding his identity was helping them because of this. Harry is full of expectations for the finale in 2 weeks. With such expectations, Harry and the others entered the fantasy cinema 2 weeks later. Oh, look at the schedule of this genius like me. In the screening room, Adam flicked his finger on a printed promotional poster. Christmas, what a perfect day, just right for this happy ending where justice destroys evil. As for the people who died in the process, well, I'll just ask you, if Voldemort was finally eliminated, I still can't believe it takes 7 years to kill a Voldemort. If this sentence were to spread, it would easily attract public attacks. Fortunately, the person who spoke was now in the screening room, and the only person who heard it was Adam. Yug grabbed a piece of popcorn and threw it into his mouth. He has now been able to integrate well into the current wizarding world, and the movies have also played a certain role in this process. The clips that introduce Harry to the wizarding world are also introducing Yug to the world 100 years later. Wizarding world, Horcruxes are indeed difficult to deal with, and none of them know ancient magic. Adam shook his head and looked at Yug. That's why I hope you and Isadora can find those wizards with ancient magical talents and train them. I will. Yug nodded, with the same expression as when he knew he wanted to save the wizarding world, and then stood up. The movie is about to start. I'm going to my seat. After saying that, Yug disapparated and disappeared. Well, the power of ancient magic can break through the limitations of anti-apparition. This should be remembered. Adam blinked, then looked towards this is the last one. Yes, since everyone is looking forward to the final film, there is very little discussion. After a few whispered conversations, the commercial ended and the main film began. At the beginning of the movie, accompanied by the ethereal groaning sound, the camera passed through the dark fog, passing the shadows of several Dementors, and finally came to the sky above Hogwarts. Audiences know that Dementors are minions of Voldemort, and the Dementors surrounding Hogwarts at this time in the movie undoubtedly show that Hogwarts is in a worrying situation today. Oh my God, I've never seen Hogwarts like this. I don't know who suddenly made such a sigh, and others also thought it was true no matter the season. Hogwarts is always fresh in their memories. Most of the year, there are brightly colored flowers and green plants. You can see little wizards chatting and reading in the garden at any time. Even in winter, the plants covered with snow are a unique sight. You can also see little wizards having snowball fights in the snow figure no matter what. Hogwarts will never look so lifeless. The film then showed the back of Professor Snape, expressionless and condescending, looking down at the professors and students walking below for some reason. Professor Snape, the villain who has played a very important role in the movie so far, does not show the same sense of madness as Voldemort, and the higher status Death Eater's silence, quietness, seemed to be always accompanying Professor Snape. As the camera turned, the scene finally became more vivid. Harry buried Dobby, and then found the goblin Griffock who they had rescued from the Malfoy mansion. Harry learned from Griffock that the Gryffindor sword in Bellatrix's vault was actually a fake. This surprised Harry, who was sitting in the screening room, because his previous speculation was wrong. It was no longer necessarily the person who brought the sword to Voldemort, of course. This also made Harry feel better. He really couldn't imagine that any of the weird Death Eaters around Voldemort could be an undercover agent who was close to his mother. Then Griffock also broke the news that the person who put the sword in the vault is now Professor Snape, the principal of Hogwarts. Because the sword was fake, most of the audience ignored the fact that the sword was put in the vault. The incident focused more on the fact that Professor Snape became the principal. So, the scene at the beginning of the movie is a hint that Hogwarts has entered a dark period under Professor Snape's rule. Under the influence of so many media, Ron also learned the knowledge of camera language. Hermione frowned. The close-up of Professor Snape's expression just now didn't look like the excitement of his ambition being realized, or the excitement of a Death Eater being granted power by Voldemort. But no matter how smart Hermione was, it was impossible to guess the truth behind Professor Snape's line. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Hermione only came up with the idea that Professor Snape might have some secrets. After purchasing Gryffindor's sword, Griffock agreed to cooperate with Harry and the others in sneaking into Bellatrix's vault. Although there were some turmoils during this period, the soul is out of body. Under the influence of the Imperious Curse, everyone successfully let the goblin who looked like the manager take them into the underground vault. Although the anti-thief waterfall washed away Hermione and Ron's transformation, with the help of Griffock, they managed to bypass the Ukrainian Iron Belly and enter the Bellatrix vault. "We can't leave," Hermione looked at the people looking for Horcruxes in the vault inside. This is what Griffock wanted, so he didn't tell us about the thief-proof falls. His deal only included taking us into Bellatrix's vault, but it didn't include taking us out, obviously. The "we" Hermione mentioned were them in the movie. Harry and Ron were shocked by Hermione's statement. How despicable, greed, and cunning are the nature of fairies. Harry then thought that there was no Gringotts anymore and couldn't help but said, so in reality they paid a heavy price for this nature. In the movie, Griffock abandoned them as expected, first used the Horcrux to blackmail Harry into giving him Gryffindor's sword, and then ran away with Gryffindor's sword, and also attracted the ancient spirit. The guard of the Pavilion Gringotts underground vault was also anti-apparition. When he was desperate, Harry suggested that they could leave Gringotts on the Ukrainian Iron Belly. Hermione and Ron couldn't help but glance at Harry sitting between them. I have to say, this crazy idea is really Harry. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372, Shidden moves out. The screening room was dead silent at this moment, because of the story told by Professor Dumbledore's brother in the movie just now. Is that true? The plots in the movie are not all true, which the audience knows very well, so they are just shocked by this plot for the time being. Professor Grindelwald couldn't help but look at Professor Dumbledore beside him. If he didn't care about the past of him and Dumbledore being made public before, or even happy to see it, then this past was different. This is the bloodiest scar in their past, which has been festering for decades and has not been truly healed until today. At the same time, he also knows that this scar may never heal in their lifetime. Now this scar is displayed in front of everyone. It's okay, Gellert, Aberforth in the movie is right, and I am no longer the person I used to be. Professor Dumbledore's face was only slightly gloomy after his brother in the movie exposed his past in front of Harry. If it was in the past, he would have really cared about it, but now he has unloaded the burden on his body, And he has also met Ariana. Although the scar still hurts, it is no longer untouchable as for the fact that the saintly Professor Dumbledore, who is known to everyone, actually has a terrible past. He has never cared about it. Harry in the movie was also shocked by this past, but after struggling, he still chose to trust Professor Dumbledore through the secret passage behind Ariana's portrait. Harry was able to successfully enter Hogwarts and learned about the current situation of Hogwarts. Harry's return immediately gave great encouragement to the students who were suffering under the rule of the Death Eaters. In the Ravenclaw Tower, when Professor McGonagall learned that Harry was fighting Voldemort according to Professor Dumbledore's instructions, she took on the task of delaying Voldemort to buy time for Harry without hesitation. Looking at herself casting the Imperious Curse on the older brother of the Carrow siblings in the movie, Professor McGonagall said with some distress, "This is not a good example for a student." Although the situation in the movie is extremely critical, the unforgivable curse is still, Professor McGonagall, the smile on your face is a little too bright. Professor Flitwick couldn't help but remind her to restrain herself, but then he couldn't help but smile. In the movie, he and Professor McGonagall joined hands to beat Professor Snape away. It's not that I have any opinions about this colleague, but I have to say that these movies really have a strong sense of substitution, especially for those of them who have a high sense of participation in the movie, confirming that this is a critical moment and Harry needs enough time. The professors of Hogwarts showed great action. They gathered the students of their respective colleges, and those underage students were evacuated to Hogsmeade Village through the secret passage, while those adults who were willing to stay and fight went to the hall with the professors among them. Slytherin College is somewhat special. It is well known that a considerable number of parents of Slytherin students are Death Eaters, and Professor Slytherin is also a person who is used to keeping to himself. Therefore, Professor McGonagall told him that the students of Slytherin College can leave freely, but if they want to fight against others, then, Horace, we will fight to the death. Professor Slughorn was frightened by Professor McGonagall's words. Amid the dense footsteps, most of the students were taken to the secret passage to leave Hogwarts, and several professors came to the gate of Hogwarts. Why not, asked Mr. Finnegan. When Professor McGonagall was asked how to blow up the corridor bridge, she said so, which made everyone think of the wizard who always made explosions in the previous movies. Hey, I don't always make explosions, do I? Finnegan's face darkened, and Neville whispered beside him, but you are really good at explosion magic, aren't you? In the movie, after walking out of the gate, Professor McGonagall turned around and looked at the castle, raising her wand. Stone pillars move, boom, accompanied by a loud bang. In the shocked eyes of the audience, the statues on the Hogwarts castle actually jumped off the stone platform. I always thought those were just statues. They actually moved. That's the transfiguration spell. Oh, I know, but Ron, whose transfiguration spell level is only at the exam standard, can't understand that there is a transfiguration spell that can control so many stone pillars to fight together. Hogwarts is being invaded. Professor McGonagall looked at the stone pillars that were moving forward step by step and said, "Build a defense line, protect us, and do your duty to the school. I want to use this spell for a long time." Looking at the stone pillars going away, Professor McGonagall, who was very serious just now, suddenly said excitedly, "Yes." Adam selectively kept this improvisation. He felt it was very Professor McGonagall, and he was obviously not the only one who felt this way. At this moment, Professor McGonagall in the screening room felt the gazes of his colleagues around him, and the excited smile on his face gradually disappeared. Ahem, these are all movie plots. A little bit of lightheartedness is just a spice. Seeing the professors jointly cast a super armor spell to cover the entire Hogwarts, all the audience felt the determination of unity to protect at the same time. Harry went to the room of requirement to inform everyone in Dumbledore's army. However, there were not only people from Dumbledore's army there, but also members of the Order of the Phoenix. At this time, a small episode was inserted. Percy finally chose to return to his family at this critical moment. This section made Percy himself a little embarrassed, but when Mrs. Molly put her hand on his shoulder, the embarrassment disappeared and only warmth remained. The professors and the Order of the Phoenix took over the task of delaying Voldemort. Harry naturally couldn't waste this precious time. Harry could feel Voldemort. He knew that the golden cup was stolen. He discovered the disappearance of the locket, and he was extremely angry. He was already outside Hogwarts. However, the diadem of Ravenclaw has been missing for hundreds of years, and no living person knows where it is. Harry suddenly had an idea. Since no living person knows, what about the dead? It was not the first time that Harry sought help from a ghost under the guidance of Nick, who was almost headless. Harry found the ghost of Ravenclaw, Ms. Grey. However, under his questioning, Ms. Grey actually revealed an unexpected surprise. Of course she knew where the Ravenclaw crown was, because she was the daughter of Ravenclaw himself. Even Voldemort had used sweet words to trick the whereabouts of Ravenclaw's crown from her. The audience looked at the screen in shock. Ms. Grey's daughter of Ravenclaw, Ms. Grey, was killed by the Bloody Baron because she loved him but could not get him, and he committed suicide and is still in shackles to atone for his sins. Is this true? I never knew this before. Professor Flitwick, the dean of Ravenclaw College, faced the puzzled eyes of his colleagues and wanted to say that he was more puzzled than them. In any case, Harry was sure that Voldemort had obtained the Ravenclaw crown, so this crown was obviously one of the Horcruxes, but Ms. Grey didn't know where the crown was. Now Harry racked his brains, trying to put himself in Voldemort's shoes and imagine where Voldemort might have hidden the diadem, somewhere that Voldemort thought even Professor Dumbledore would never know about it. Chapter 373. The castle engulfed by war. That was their familiar campus. Harry has never been a good student who listened to professors, so the process of assuming the mentality of Voldemort's student days was very smooth. Harry soon came up with a place where, from a bad student's point of view, he wouldn't be spotted by the by-the-book professors, the Room of Requirement. On Harry's way to the Room of Requirement, the Death Eaters had already launched an attack on Hogwarts, and the protective magic covering Hogwarts was bombarded with a shocking light explosion. Harry met many people as he walked through the castle halls. Professor Sprout and several students hurried past with earmuffs and mandrakes. Aberforth, who noticed that a large group of students suddenly appeared in the bar, rushed over through the secret passage. The Weasley family and the professor, they all stood ready together, and Tonks, who handed the child to her mother, came to support. No. Lupin and I don't have any children yet, Tonks. Somewhat irritable voice suddenly sounded in the screening room. Here almost everyone who wanted to fight Voldemort came over at the same time. Hermione and Ron also brought good news. They found something that could destroy the Horcrux. Ron opened the door to the secret room by imitating Harry's Parselmouth method of opening the locket, and obtained the basilisk tooth from it. If it were just an ordinary poisonous snake, the poison on the snake's teeth would have disappeared long ago after it had been dead for so many years. However, the venom of the basilisk is essentially an extremely powerful black magic, so it still remains on the teeth after so many years. Seeing this scene, Harry glanced at Ron in surprise, but I'm afraid they couldn't discuss it for a while at this moment. Too fast. The movie is too fast-paced at the moment. Everyone is preparing for the war with extreme urgency, and Harry in the movie is not stopping for a moment. Voldemort will not give them a second chance, and they will not be able to organize so many such strong companions to fight against Voldemort for the second time, so we have to fight for points? Looking at Ron and Hermione, who started kissing after having a disagreement in the movie, Harry was just as full of questions as the Harry in the movie. Isn't it a little inappropriate to do this at this time? Only when Harry opened his mouth did he realize that these words were spoken by himself in the movie. It had to be said that he simply spoke what was in his heart. Well, if you miss this time, who knows if you will have another chance. In the movie, Ron was a little embarrassed and said some cruel words, and Harry finally realized that despite the excitement in the movie, the war scenes later would probably be very cruel. Not only Harry, but many viewers also wanted to go together, but no one could imagine how cruel it would be until they actually saw it. In any case, at least the audience now thinks they are ready. If we all die in a fight, how about we put a tombstone for both of us in the Wizarding Wheezes shop? Fred said to George with a smile. What a great idea. Talk to Adam and he should agree. Also, I think we can make a complete tomb and put laughing candies inside the coffin. After George finished speaking, the two of them showed the same smile, smiling genuine. I know you understand me. X2. The two couldn't help but high five. When Fred and George are together, they can even laugh loudly at death. However, when death tears them apart, they will truly realize why the world fears death. Adam smiled and took a sip of Dream Coke. The dreamy sweetness exploded in his taste buds with fine bubbles. I will record your reactions for you when the time comes. In addition, if you still want to release Fred's tomb after watching the movie, I will give you a free license. Harry's progress in eliminating the Horcruxes increased by 1, and he was rushing to the location of the next Horcrux. The progress seemed promising, but it also angered Voldemort. Sensing that he had once again lost a Horcrux, was dissatisfied with the Death Eater's slow progress and took action to directly defeat the protective magic outside Hogwarts. However, this attack also caused the durability of the Elder Wand to decrease. The movie specifically gave a close-up. Voldemort was not the acknowledged master of the Elder Wand, and the Elder Wand was rejecting his magic power. The protective magic was defeated, and the Death Eaters who had previously been blocked from the magic were able to break directly into Hogwarts. Trolls, Dementors, hags, dark wizards, werewolves. Wave after wave of invaders hit the defense line formed by teachers and students of Hogwarts like a tide. Although the defense line composed of stone piers blocked the enemy for a while, but was soon torn to pieces under the charge. Regardless of the cost, shots of powerful black magic either fell from the sky or exploded directly in the crowd. After the real melee, the defense line formed by Hogwarts turned out to be somewhat vulnerable. This is natural. Except for a few professors and members of the Order of the Phoenix, the remaining students had never participated in such a battle before. The battle? Take cover. Enter the castle and take cover. Amid the chants, wails and screams, Professor McGonagall's voice rang out in the film, but the camera quickly moved through the crowd without even lingering on Professor McGonagall for a single frame. As the camera moves, everyone can see large or small battles taking place in all directions of Hogwarts. There are sounds of masonry and glass collapsing and breaking everywhere. Everyone can see the castle gradually being swallowed up by the flames of war. A campus they are familiar with under this cold lens language. All the audience felt the atmosphere of the movie at this moment. In a battle of this scale, or war, everyone is so insignificant. As the camera turned, Harry and his friends had arrived at the Room of Requirement and found the Ravenclaw's diadem. But at this moment, Draco, Crabbe and Goyle also appeared in the melee. The diadem was knocked into the pile of debris. Harry and his friends wanted to continue looking for it, but Crabbe cast a fire magic they didn't recognize. The flame seemed to be alive, and groups of fire beasts evolved from it. Fiendfire, Hermione whispered in surprise. Crabbe can actually use such advanced black magic. You know, even she didn't have the confidence to control this kind of magic. Then the movie explained this problem to Hermione. That is, Crabbe didn't know that he couldn't control this kind of magic, and burned the entire Room of Requirement and himself. Harry and his friends still managed to escape with the help of a few brooms in the Room of Requirement, and they also pulled out the trapped Draco and Goyle on the way. Draco in the screening room looked at himself in the movie with a complicated expression. According to this trend, would his next role be to turn over a new leaf and become friends with Harry? I don't know what Draco's mental journey is like at this moment in reality, and the plot in the movie is still going on. Harry wanted to destroy the crown that he had just grabbed at the critical moment, but unexpectedly found that the crown had been destroyed. It turned out that Fiendfire was also a dark magic that was enough to destroy Horcruxes. After destroying another Horcrux, Harry and his friends were about to find others to join them, but found that the surroundings had become a battlefield. They saw Percy fighting with a Death Eater, and Fred also came. At this moment, the air suddenly exploded. The entire screen was filled with white light, and an unsettling buzzing sound echoed inside the screening room. Chapter 374, The Magpie's Cry is faintly heard. The white light passed, and the buzzing sound gradually subsided, but the theater remained silent, just like the movie, and this silence made people feel uneasy. What happened just now? No. Suddenly, a loud shout broke the silence. The audience in the front row felt nervous. It was Percy's voice. What happened to make Percy make such a sound? No. The same words came out of the mouths of those who thought quickly. Anyone who was familiar with Fred and George did not dare to continue to imagine, but the movie still cruelly and faithfully played the subsequent content. No. No. Fred. Percy's sad voice. Percy himself had never heard such a sad voice. Undoubtedly revealed everything. Fred stared at the screen in a daze. George's hands were bulging with veins, and he tightly grasped the armrest. They were overwhelmed by what happened in the movie. At this moment it turned out that they might also be separated. It turned out that in addition to them all dying in battle, there was also the possibility that one of them died in battle and the other lived. Fred hadn't recovered yet, but George quickly realized it. Although Percy screamed so miserably, Fred might not be dead. There are many possibilities for Percy to become like this, such as Fred also lost an ear like him, or lost a hand or something. Of course, it could also be that Fred was pretending to be dead, and it has to be said that this is really an inappropriate prank. It is even possible that Percy was playing a prank. Didn't you hear what he said just now? He would joke when fighting with cynics, and it is entirely possible that he suddenly came up with a prank now, but the camera seemed to be playing a bad joke on them at this moment, playing Percy's crying, But the screen was given to Harry, who had not recovered from the explosion under George's bloodshot eyes. The camera stumbled forward with Harry, where there were three red-haired Wheel Eyes Ronelt on the side in a daze. Percy kept shaking the person in his arms, calling Fred's name over and over again, and the camera finally stopped on Fred's face. He still had a familiar smile on his face, but his eyes were empty, and he didn't respond to Percy's call. No, George seemed to have been drained of his strength. He felt that the whole world had become distant, and his chest inexplicably surged with a mass of hot, swollen and sour things. Fred was surprised to see George standing up, and quickly reached out to pull him back to his seat. "What are you doing?" Fred's voice suddenly became silent when he saw George with tears on his face. George made such a mouth shape, but no sound came out. But Fred's mind automatically sounded the call that he had heard countless times. "I'm here." Suppressing the sourness in his heart, Fred knew that George was too fascinated by the movie, and said, "It's just a movie, George." Facing the scene just now, the person in the best state was probably him, the person involved, just like George was the first to react when he lost his ears. Yes, after listening to Fred's words, George nodded and opened his mouth several times before finding his voice. "But there will be such a day, won't it?" Fred was startled and couldn't help turning his head away from George's face, but George still pointed out something they had never thought about before. "There will always be such a day, Fred, unless we die on the same day, the same minute, and the same second. Otherwise, one of them will leave first and cruelly abandon the other in this world. So, what?" Fred was silent for a while and suddenly turned back to look at George. "We can invent something that can make us die on the same day, the same minute, and the same second. Start inventing from today." "Yes. Have I ever said that, Fred? You are a genius, Georgius." I suddenly lit up. "Nothing can stop Fred and George. Death can't even think of separating us." Great. Bold words. I have to say that this reaction is a bit beyond my expectations, but it is indeed very Fred and George. Adam put away the crystal ball responsible for recording, but the kind of thing you are talking about is unlikely to be realized under normal circumstances, unless the other side is activated immediately to kill the other person after detecting the death of one person. Obviously, Fred and George didn't want this kind of magic prop that was similar to mutual destruction. Fred and George were immersed in Fred's death in the movie for a long time before they recovered, but others couldn't, just like Harry and others in the movie now. Their grief was greater than the audience, but the situation did not allow them to immerse themselves in grief. The flying spells and the intruding eight-eyed giant spider reminded them of their current situation. Percy roared and rushed towards the Death Eaters who had just thrown the arrow that took his brother's life, but Harry and the others could not vent their anger on revenge. All the hatred, all the concerns, all the other thoughts had to be put aside at this moment because they had more important things to do. They had to keep looking for the last Horcrux of the 6 Horcruxes speculated by Professor Dumbledore. Only the last one remains. Harry already knows what it is: Nagini, the big snake that follows Voldemort through induction. Harry found Voldemort's current location. He was at the boathouse, with Nagini by his side. He ordered Lucius to find Professor Snape. Harry and his friends rushed all the way to the outside of the boathouse and happened to hear the conversation between Voldemort and Professor Snape. Voldemort revealed the secret of the Elder Wand. He said that he felt that the Elder Wand did not recognize him as its master. This wand only follows those who defeated its master, and Professor Snape is the current Elder Wand master who killed its former master Dumbledore. Voldemort thinks so. The previous defeats against Harry made Voldemort irritable, and the loss of one Horcrux after another made him extreme. The first time Voldemort used his wand against Harry, he couldn't kill him. Under his questioning, Ollivander revealed the secret of the twin wands, so he replaced it with Lucius's wand. However, during the Seven Potters operation, Voldemort fought against Harry, and Lucius's wand turned into powder. Voldemort didn't know that it was Harry's wand that sensed him and automatically counterattacked and returned the power stored in the previous battle with him. Instead, he lost because he didn't have a twin wand. Voldemort just thought that Lucius's wand was too weak. Now Voldemort has the most powerful wand in the legend. As long as he can completely control the Elder Wand, he will definitely be able to kill Harry. He is convinced of this. For this reason, it doesn't matter if he loses Snape, a loyal and capable subordinate. As long as Harry's killed, no one can threaten his life anymore. He will enjoy eternal life, power and everything he wants, and there will be no more troubles. With a scream, Nagini's fangs pierced into Professor Snape's neck. After doing all this, Voldemort did not stay. He was confident that Snape had no chance of survival, so he took Nagini and left quickly. Chapter 375 What are you willing to give in exchange, Severus? After Voldemort left, Harry walked out of the shadows. Harry, Hermione couldn't help but call him from behind, but Harry still walked into the boathouse and came to Professor Snape at this time. Professor Snape was holding his neck tightly, where blood was constantly flowing out. He looked at Harry, his eyes widened, and his mouth moved as if he wanted to say something. The emotions in those eyes were too complicated and extremely sincere. Harry couldn't help but lean forward slightly. He also made the same action in the movie. He leaned over to Professor Snape. Take it, go, he finally heard what Professor Snape said, and then he noticed the liquid left in the corner of Professor Snape's eyes. It was not tears or blood, but something silver blue. Harry suddenly thought of something and turned his head quickly. Hermione conjured a narrow-necked bottle and handed it to Harry, and Harry used it to catch the liquid. He knew this thing. It was a memory extracted by magic. He could see the contents of it by pouring it into the pensieve. Finally, all those memories were collected by Harry, and this action seemed to drain Professor Snape's last strength at the end of his life. He looked into those green eyes. Look at me. Harry was puzzled, but still looked into Professor Snape's eyes. Suddenly, Professor Snape's eyes became empty, just like Fred before. Harry stared at Professor Snape's body and stayed there. He was shocked by the way Professor Snape died and everything he did before his death, all different from what he had imagined before. In addition, the look in Professor Snape's eyes before he died, everyone in the screening room was also shocked. They could feel the surging and suppressed emotions of Professor Snape before he died, but they were confused about it. The only few people who could see the emotions behind this were Professor Snape, who had guessed what would happen in the movie and didn't watch it at all. Professor Dumbledore watched this scene in silence, and Adam, Alice, this scene will be most lethal if you look back. What a pity, Adam sighed with some regret. The only person who could be stabbed was Professor Snape. It was a pity that Professor Snape had already turned a blind eye to him putting these things out. It was unlikely that he would take the initiative to eat the knife. The movie was still going on, leaving Harry and the others little time. Voldemort's voice came, as if it sounded beside everyone. He said that in order to commend their bravery and to retain more pure-blood wizards, he would order his subordinates to withdraw so that the Hogwarts side could collect the bodies, and he would wait for Harry in the Forbidden Forest to fight him one-on-one. Of course, Voldemort's words were definitely not well-intentioned. Between the lines, it was revealed that Harry had been avoiding fighting with him, which led to so many casualties. In the end, he also emphasized that if Harry did not duel with him in the Forbidden Forest within an hour, he would kill all the remaining people in Hogwarts. No matter what Voldemort was thinking, at least Hogwarts had a brief peace now. They came to the hall and met the survivors' cries of pain, comfort. Low voices echoed throughout the hall, and everyone in it, even those who were watching outside the movie, felt an unspeakable sense of suffocation. This sense of suffocation came from the dull eyes of the survivors and from the bodies whose heads and faces were covered and whose identities could not be recognized, especially those figures that passed by. The audience could not help but correspond to people with similar figures and familiar to themselves. Harry was filled with mixed feelings, and hurriedly walked among the crowd and came to the principal's office. He wanted to know what was in the memory that Professor Snape gave him before he died. In addition, he needed something to divert his attention, so that he would not think about the scene he had just seen. The silver blue memory slowly poured into the pensieve, and what was blurred was the secret deep in Professor Snape's memory. The story began with a boy and a girl before they entered Hogwarts. They were very close partners, but after entering Hogwarts, the boy entered Slytherin and the girl entered Gryffindor. As the scene changed again and again, the boy and the girl grew up, but they drifted further and further apart. Dark magic, hijackers. More and more things appeared between them, pushing them to both sides, until the boy blurted out that word without thinking: mudblood. The boy regretted it, and the girl cut off the last hope, and the two completely went on different paths. The scene changed again, and when he appeared again, the boy had become the familiar Professor Snape, who seemed to be waiting for someone. Harry held his breath and concentrated, his eyes a little straight. He had never thought that Professor Snape actually had a deep connection with his mother. He only knew that his father had bullied Professor Snape in school. This fragment that subverted his cognition filled his mind, but he could not think about it seriously, because he did not want to miss any information released by the movie at this moment. So Harry could only accept the information instilled in him by the movie. In a daze, the person Professor Snape was waiting for appeared, but he did not expect that the person he was waiting for was Professor Dumbledore. Professor Dumbledore's contempt for Professor Snape once again subverted many people's cognition. Professor Snape accepted Professor Dumbledore's unkind attitude towards him. He said that he told Voldemort about the prophecy. He said that he had a request, asking Professor Dumbledore to hide the Lily family. He originally thought that Voldemort would only kill the prophesied child, but he did not expect that Voldemort planned to directly kill Harry's entire family, including Lily. So Professor Snape had no choice but to come to Professor Dumbledore. Harry, his already overloaded brain, was completely stuck at this moment. Harry stared with wide eyes at Professor Snape, who looked extremely humble in front of Professor Dumbledore. In the movie, Harry did not expect that the next development would surprise him even more. Facing the information brought by Professor Snape, Voldemort wanted to kill members of the Order of the Phoenix and asked Professor Dumbledore to protect the Harry family. Professor Dumbledore's answer was almost indifferent. So, what are you willing to give in exchange, Severus? In other words, if Professor Snape can't pay enough in return, Professor Dumbledore won't protect Harry's family. You know, Harry's parents are both members of the Order of the Phoenix. Professor Grindelwald was not surprised by this, and even took the time to glance at Professor Dumbledore beside him. He looked at the screen, his face as calm as in the movie. Harry looked at Professor Dumbledore in surprise, and Professor Snape in the movie had a similar expression, but Professor Snape then spoke after a long silence. Anything is fine. In order to save Lily's life, he would give anything. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.